Coming up next, The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy. Every Thursday from 4 p.m, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
People are struggling to have conversations and connect with others that they don't completely agree with on every topic. And I think that's probably the biggest problem that we need to try and solve, is how after all this division and after all this separation do we end up bringing people together again, and what does unity really look like?
New Zealand faces some pretty big issues. First one is COVID and the aftermath. There's no getting away from that. Second is racial division. It's been ginned up and it's dangerous. Another issue that maybe people haven't got their head around yet is digital currency. What form does that take? Is it programmable? Will it be used to manipulate behaviour and patterns of behaviour? Those questions need to be asked and answered.
How can you have fair, open, democratic government by people who are appointed? It's a ridiculous idea. And if that idea is taken to its zenith, then this country is in real trouble, because democracy, one person, one vote, where every vote is of equal value, has got to be the foundation of a modern New Zealand.
What's true, what's not true, how our kids are to be educated. And, I have a great fear for the future. I think we know from history where this could end up.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Welcome to The Crunch on Reality Check Radio. I'm your host, Cam Slater, and this is the place we crunch the political issues and cut through the politician's spin. And this week promises to be a real banger. First, I'll have a catch-up with Winston Peters. It's been a while. We're going to talk about the media carry-on and misrepresentation over his State of the Nation speech at Palmerston North. He's not backing down and is bashing the legacy media hard. And then I'm going to have a bit of a panel discussion with Pollster David Farrar and Simon Lusk about Chris Hipkins and his silly attack on Winston Peters, which backfired, and then plot out a path for what Labour needs to do to become competitive again. Of course, we'll have the mailbag to get your feedback, and we'll close out the show with Cam's buddies and see what they have to say about Winston's State of the Nation speech and the reaction to it. Don't forget to send comments to inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057. Winston Peters has been making waves in the media, who are attacking him for daring to call out the inherent racism of Te Pāti Māori, their MPs, and indeed the media, for turning a blind eye to their overt racism. And he's not backing down, and neither am I. I'm going to dive deep into this topic that hits close to home for many of us. The perils of politicians, political parties, and the media exploiting racial superiority to divide our nation. Now, before we delve into this crucial discussion, I want you to take a moment and reflect on some history. Remember the Holocaust? It didn't start with the gas chambers. No, it started with something far more insidious. It started when one party controlled the media, deciding what was truth and what was propaganda. It started when one party censored speech and silenced dissent, effectively controlling the opposition. It started when one party divided citizens into us and them, scapegoating minorities and inciting hatred. And it started when good people turned a blind eye and let it happen. And it didn't just happen in Nazi Germany. It happened right here in New Zealand, under the Ardern-Hipkins regime. And that is what Winston Peters is calling out. We cannot afford to repeat the mistakes of the past. And yet here we are, witnessing echoes of history in our own time. Politicians and media outlets are exploiting racial tension, feeding into the narrative of superiority and division. They're using fear and hatred as tools to manipulate the masses, all in the name of power and control. But we must not be fooled. We must not allow ourselves to be pawns in the game of division. We must stand united against bigotry and injustice, regardless of our political affiliations. It's time for us to hold our leaders and media accountable. We cannot allow them to dictate what is true and what is false. We cannot allow them to silence dissenting voices or marginalize entire communities. And we certainly cannot allow them to perpetrate the dangerous myth of racial superiority. So what can we do? Well, we can start by educating ourselves and others. We can challenge misinformation and propaganda wherever we encounter it. And we can support policies and initiatives that promote equality and inclusivity. And most importantly, we can stand in solidarity with those who are marginalized and oppressed. Remember, the Holocaust didn't start with the gas chambers. It started with complacency, with indifference, with the normalization of hatred. Let us not repeat the mistakes of the past. Let us be the voices of reason in a world plagued by division and hatred. And that's why we exist here at Reality Check Radio. Until next time, stay informed, stay vigilant, and above all, stay united. Winston Peters has been dominating the news since his State of the Nation speech. The media have misrepresented it. Chris Hipkins attacked and got sat back on his derriere, and Winston is laughing all the way to the Parliament. Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, welcome back to The Crunch. The last time we spoke officially was election eve, where you gave me an interview just after the results had come in.
Yes, I did. Actually, the first interview I did with anyone.
That's right. And it unhinged David Fisher at the Herald something wicked as well.
Well, why doesn't he wise up? The idea that they know everything when the circumstances are not in their control, it quite alarms me. But he's usually a good writer, David, but sometimes he lets himself down, I think.
I have a different point of view on that, but that's more of a personal issue that I have. But he has been a good journalist in the past, but unfortunately lets himself down rather too frequently these days. But don't the media let themselves down all the time? And a case in point is the little contretemps that's going on now between the media and yourself with the reporting of your State of the Nation speech.
Well, here's the thing. What happened here was they didn't take what I said. They took what they thought I said and then went bonkers with it. And then in a question to me, in person, not part of the speech, I confirmed another aspect. But they still related to the speech, and on they went. And words like genocide and Holocaust was never in my speech at all.
No.
And all those people that use those words, dare I say it, Nazis, Holocaust, genocide, I've got countless, I've got a whole file of them now, from Wajiti to Golriz and, sad to say, all sorts of people, Packer, making all those comments, genocide and what have you. Not one journalist went to them. But when they thought they had a chance to gaslight me, they had to go. But I'm watching the social media. The social media is awful for them.
Well, that's the thing. I saw this morning a comment from the new co-leader of the Greens, Chloe Swarbrick, who said that it was, crazy behaviour. And I was sitting there thinking, hang on a second, weren't you the one who had a tea towel draped around your shoulder, shouting from the river to the sea with great vehemence, promoting a chant that actually does celebrate or indeed invoke genocide?
Well, after the 7th of October last year, in that appalling terrorist attack on Israel, did she say a word? No.
No, not a mutter, not a murmur.
That's why you cannot trust people if it's unbalanced when it comes to things like that there. But my point to the mainstream media is, you're not going to get away with trying to gaslight me. You're not going to go to Luxton and say to him, Winston said this, when he hasn't even heard me say it, and then impute various things about that and then expect him to react. The reality of it all is, I made it very clear in my conversation with Mr. Luxton that I've been saying this for 40 years. I believe in one standard of citizenship with equal rights in this country called New Zealand. And I always have, and I'm always going to defend it, because without that, the moment you get as Watiti said, claiming that Maori had a superior DNA, the flow-on of that superiority is to imply and impute and then put into place policies of inferiority, and you know how bad that looks. So we're not backing down at all. Rather, we're going to rack it up, because people need to know that this country called New Zealand has fallen dramatically on the basis of divisive policies like co-governance. Co-governance based on what? Race. That's simple. And worse than that, based on ethnic numbers, where sometimes the numbers impute Maori when the person's got one part in 512. See the fiction and the fraud that's going on here? Meanwhile, real issues of Maori want: housing, health, education, access to education, health, education and housing, and first world wages just passed by the wayside.
Maori want the same thing as everybody else.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, why aren't we just everybody else? I was showing a graphic on X, formerly known as Twitter, yesterday, and it's just got a short message, but it applies to this topic that we're talking about. It says it didn't start with the gas chambers. It started with one party controlling the media, one party controlling the message, one party deciding what is truth, one party censoring speech and controlling the opposition, one party dividing citizens into us versus them, and calling on their supporters to harass them. It started when good people turned a blind eye and let it happen. And that's what we saw in between 2020 and 2023. That's exactly what we saw in New Zealand.
Yeah, that's the truth. There's the famous Niemöller from Germany who said and he's going through all the groups. They came for so-and-so and I wasn't one of them. And they came for so-and-so and I wasn't one of them. And he goes through all the cases and said, and then they came for me and there was nobody left to defend me. And he wasn't precisely right. So these people are extrapolating their interpretations with no authority or veracity whatsoever. But what's been amazing, I can tell you, but I can't give you the names, but the number of senior experienced journalists have called me to say, stick to it. You're on the right pathway. Don't leave off.
Well, that's the feedback that I'm getting. You know, walking on the beach this morning at Takapuna, I had someone stop me and say, you seeing what Winston's doing? He's saying the right thing. This is what people on the street are saying, or on the beach in this case, are saying.
Well, that's the thing. But what is imaged here and screams it is that you've got people in the media who think that they're so special, that they've got tremendously unique insights, that everybody else out there is a nobody. It's that arrogance that I find quite crushing. And worst of all, that's that arrogance that leads people to not report everything in the marketplace, but only one booth in the marketplace, so to speak. The old, media town crier of the former age saying, over here, all these products and over there. No, they're just talking about one product, the one that they support. I was on the AM show this morning, morning show for TV1, rather.
Soon to be defunct.
Well, the thing was, they began with a lie and thought they could stick to it. And so you got to kick back as hard as you can, because I was saying your listeners need to know what the truth is, and they're not hearing from you.
They wouldn't have liked that.
Oh, no. Well, they had that staggered look. How dare he talk to me this way? And I feel like saying, how dare you perform so badly when your producer's going to be watching you and knowing that's not going down too good for you, if you're a medium, that is.
Well, you just have to look at what's happening on X. Tova O'Brien put up something yesterday on X, and almost every comment on it is, why don't you shut up? Winston's right.
That was incredible. It's about 99-1.
Oh, it's terrible. They call it ratioing. She got absolutely slammed.
I thought they're going to accuse me of doing all the tweets and all the comments, but I didn't. I just hadn't been referred to there by one of my staff, said, you better go and have a look at that.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary. And, I'm saddened by them, because it means that their duration in this industry is not going to be for much longer.
What was interesting is that the spin-off and Tova O'Brien went running off to probably the sole remaining living band member of a one-hit wonder band. And
the guitarist.
The lead guitarist, and tried to create a stink over that. Your press releases show that you're having immense fun with all of this, and I particularly like the one where you said you were going to pick a another song from them, but you found they didn't have any.
That's right. But the thing is, here we are at Palmerston North, and maybe they're all respect to people outside, but it's preposterous to think all the way there in Liverpool after all those years the band, when it has been disbanded, they had a view. Oh, no, they didn't. Some lifty shill from Spinoff wrongly informed the guy, and by the time he'd made up his mind, he was adamant about it, but at the very close, he wasn't too certain about it, even in that interview. And as for the legal side, but I thought this is extraordinary. They went off to get it to a legal expert as well. And with the greatest respect to that legal expert, he ain't no expert on this matter. You show me the precedent case he's talking about. And I'm not talking about NMM and National, because they were using it in their campaign advertising. Yeah. I was talking about a public meeting.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a massive beat up. But, I was talking to a mate and he says, Cam, I reckon Winston probably slipped a few quid to that band to have a go so that he could keep the story running for another day.
Well, there are people out there who are so disconnected and so unbalanced, they would believe that instantly.
Well, they probably would. Look, it's been going for 4 days now. Do you think you can get it to carry on till the weekend?
Oh, they will not leave off until they find out by Sunday it's all over. But it'll go all the way to the weekend because there are variations on their bias.
Yeah. Have you ever had a State of the Nation speech that has had so much coverage?
No. No, that's the part they're going to accuse me of. You did it all to get coverage. No, I didn't. I just made one statement, and all of a sudden they're there. All these journalists were there. They didn't like me telling them, things like, for example, what did you do about talking about the true state of the economy last year? The public interest fund, the bribes, what did you do about that? You guys did nothing. That's what I said to them all. And of course, they're sitting there with a new thing called, it's a psychological condition called recognition hunger. and a medical condition called group venom. And they decided to attack me. And I thought, there's a famous line from General Abrams. He made his name in the Second World War in the forest on the outskirts of Germany, France. And he got cut off. He had 250 men under his control. He got cut off by the Germans and is in serious isolation. And those days they used to have a backpack that's half the size of a car on your back as the phone. And his general finally got in contact with them. And what the conversation went right through the American troops in a sense. And they said, we got to go and find this guy. But the general said to him, what's happening? What's happening? And he said, what's happening? They've surrounded us again, the poor bastards. And that's how I feel at the moment, right?
Well, they've surrounded you again, but you're about to fight your way through them.
Well, they said, we got to go and find that guy. He's got the right attitude.
Well, they actually named the Abrams tank after him. That's how revered he is in the U.S. Army.
Yes, he went on to be Commander Allied Forces, Vietnam. Sadly, it was a war they should never have entered. Yeah. They hadn't studied the true state of the affairs over there between Vietnam and China. But that's another story.
Oh, yes. We can talk history all day long, as you and I do often. There's a lot of talk. Bryce Edwards wrote an article on Tuesday saying that, the government's in trouble. They've only got this much percentage in an average of the polls. You've got Benedict Collins who's saying, has the Prime Minister told you off? Has he ticked you off? Are you in trouble with that? You've got all these other journalists. What is the state of the coalition, Winston? Well, this Benedict Collins, who called me, asked me one time, are you a crook? This would be with respect to the Serious Fraud Office. So we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, rather, of our own money in 2 major court cases and win both times. And he never has the decency to apologize. Then the last thing he shouted out the other day, this is how arrogant he is, he said, has the Prime Minister told you to pull your head in? Isn't that a great question for a journalist to ask? Has his Prime Minister told you to pull your head in? See how frustrating he is? And my answer is, Benedict, I can't see you lasting long on this profession at all, not down in Parliament. People like you are going to become irrelevant. Well, that's right. They can become irrelevant because everyone recognises how biased they are. And so no one then wants to talk to them. And when you're a journalist in the press gallery, you need people to talk to you. Otherwise, you're not going to get stories. Well, the great PR people, the great lobbyists for that matter, and great journalists also
have one feature. They talk to everybody.
Yeah.
And that's critical. That's why they're telling the marketplace what the product of ideas is on the market. They tell them what the full quality of the product is, not just at one product.
I look back at the press gallery and there's some pretty, famous names there, just brilliant journalists that have sadly, there's not many of them left. In fact, I'd argue there's probably only one left. And he's only working part-time at his job. But the rest of them seem to have no understanding of history, no understanding of how the political process works, and they're running around trying to get somebody on things that are not important. No one in the street cares whether or not Chris Hipkins says that you're like the drunk uncle at a wedding. But, no one cares about that sort of stuff. What they care about is how much their petrol costs, whether their mum or their dad can get a hip operation or something like that, whether the teachers are teaching the kids how to read and write and spell things properly. That's what people care about, not these sledges and not these idiotic gotcha type moments.
Well, my reaction to Mr. Hipkins is, Mr. Hipkins, when you can tell me what a woman is, I'll take you seriously.
Yeah.
But this is how bad he was. He was asked, can you, Mr. Hipkins, describe what a woman is? And he said, I'll get back to you. See what's wrong?
Totally. Now, as the foreign minister, I've got a bit of an interest in the Pacific, having been born in Fiji. You've just recently come back from a trip to Fiji. How'd that go?
It was excellent, actually. It was really quite comprehensive as well. We went to the barracks, so to speak.
Victoria Barracks, yep.
Yes, we went there for a reception they put on. It was huge. Caught me totally unawares. And then I spent some time with a number of people over there. But I got a chance to probably meet, half the cabinet at one function, which is great, really. And I had to spend some time with Ram Booker, who I've known for a long, long time, and others. And the leader of the other political persuasions, I got to see some of them. And all in all, it was reinforcement of the reconnection. And we're going to have to do a whole lot more work with Fiji, and of course the Pacific Forum. The Pacific Forum is there, the Pacific Islands Forum, but we signaled all that. And then since that time, look, I have been to India to talk to their foreign minister, and we talked with them about a program that they've got to set up a hospital in, guess where? Fiji.
Yeah.
A new Indian hospital in Fiji. And then I talked to the foreign minister for Indonesia on my way back as well. And I was talking about a wide range of subjects, including Fiji, and they're going to work with us together, New Zealand and Indonesia, to put together a project in Fiji. So it's really quite exciting when you think about it.
Yeah, because there's been a lot of inroads made into the Pacific by China, using their cash to curry favour with Pacific nations. And New Zealand and Australia have sat there in many respects wagging their finger at these Pacific nations, whilst the Chinese have been burying millions and millions of dollars into their own infrastructure.
Well, it's been my concern, and it was for some time longer in my younger political career, as to the approach being taken by New Zealand and Australia, where the Pacific Islands were concerned. And my approach has been decidedly different. I've spelled it out over and over again, and that is, when you're, no matter how small that country is, when you're in that country or you're talking with them, never underestimate the need for them to be regarded as total equals. We expect that when dealing with large countries. They've got a right to expect it when we're dealing with small island nations.
Every time I've been in Fiji talking to government people, and this goes back quite some years, back to the Bainimarama years, the feedback that I got from locals in Suva was that they quite like Kiwis coming up there and doing business and being involved in the government level. They really don't like Australians an awful lot, other than for the tourism. Well,
there have been changes in Australia's approach as well of late. And I've got no doubt that they would have seen Maurice Payne, she's the previous to Penny Wong, foreign minister. They'd have seen a different person, a different approach. But certainly I've sought always to ensure that they could never accuse me of patronising or coming the senior soldier and all those things which we Kiwis hate.
Yeah,
should not replicate it in our behaviour either.
Now, how about the recent visit from China to New Zealand. How did that go?
Well, it was great to reconnect with Wang Yi. I mean, he was a foreign minister for a long time. Then he left that scene, another person took his place, and all of a sudden, mid last year, there was a switch back to Wang Yi. And I've never asked what happened to the previous one, but so I was reconnecting with him for the first time since 2018 in China when I last saw him. I've seen him in a different forum after that, but not in China. And they were obviously, how should I put it, not in an unnice way, but they were on a charm offensive. And so we had a great discussion about a lot of things. Some things we didn't agree on. I raised the issues, like the Uyghurs, like Hong Kong, what happened to the one country, two systems, which I was aware of on that handover, which I attended in 1997. It's a long time ago. So I was saying to him, if we've got a difference with you, we're going to politely, if you don't mind, speak our mind. It's called treating people as equal.
It's funny because I haven't seen any of that reported in the New Zealand media anywhere, particularly that you raised the issue with the Uyghurs.
The New Zealand media, I got 6 journalists in to tell them specifically what happened. I gave them the time of day, early the next morning. No, guess what they've reported on in the main? They've reported on Foreign Minister Wang Yi's in New Zealand, but he's going to Australia. How do you like that? That was the headline.
But I would have thought raising the issue of the Uyghurs, which is kind of a third rail issue for the Chinese,
yes,
would have been reported. I mean, if Jacinda Ardern had met the Chinese foreign minister and raised the Uyghurs, they would have been waxing lyrical about how she challenged the Chinese foreign minister.
You're exactly right. But, Wang Yi, Foreign Minister Wang Yi, got to see Chris Luxon. He got to see the Trade Minister Todd McClay. Now, you've got to ask yourself, why didn't they think that was worth covering? This fellow's coming from this huge economy, big population, second biggest population to India in the world. He's in our country, and they didn't think it was worthy of headlines. So it begs the question, don't they understand that trade is critical to our future?
Well, otherwise we'll all sit around cutting each other's hair and thinking everything's wonderful.
Yeah, and taking each other's washing and going broke.
Yeah. For New Zealand, trade is imperative, but it has to be trade on fair terms.
But you're quite right, and on fair terms. But, our trade has been seriously enormous help to us, and it's been of enormous help to China, because Chinese need to feed their people. They need to do a lot of things, and they know they haven't got all the resources, and so that's been good for them as well. But here we are, a country highly dependent on trade, and our media don't seem to understand it. What on earth's going wrong here?
And more worried about whether or not you used the right song or not.
Yes, And let me say, that is the point. They said he's been using it in all his meetings. No, I haven't. Somebody on my staff thought it was quite a funny idea, and I thought, actually, they're right. It sounds good. I'll try it. Did it down in Palmerston North. I had no idea that reverberating on the BBC would be my meeting in Palmerston North. How do you look like that?
There's not many people can put Palmerston North on the map, and you've managed it.
It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, there was 700 people there. The photos I've seen of there was standing room only at the back. I mean, you didn't use the usual little trick of putting out the chairs and then removing 2 rows so everybody has to stand. I mean, the National Party used to do that. I know, because Dad taught me that trick.
There's only 600 chairs there, and they were out more on the side, out the back door, and many people couldn't get in, so there's well over 700. You'd think that would be important? No, they described it as a meeting of the party base. No, it wasn't. There was a stack of people there. I saw a whole lot of National Party people there for a start.
You'd be pretty happy if you had 700 members in Palmerston North, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, but you're being logical. You worked that out. I'd have the biggest party in Australasia if I had that many Palmerston North. But no, that's what they said. So what do you do?
Well, you just press on regardless.
I've got to press on and keep on being reminded by my staff, Winston, be charitable, be forgiving, keep smiling. It's not so easy these days.
Oh, no, I've seen a lot of smiling this week, and you can thank the media for that. And, you're a busy man. I better let you go. Thank you for taking the time to talk to The Crunch, and we'll get you on again sometime soon.
Well, just to give you an idea now, I got up here, got to work early this morning, but I've began the day by talking to the Spanish foreign minister. I'm going to be talking to the Romanian ambassador from Canberra today at 4 o'clock, then on to the foreign minister for the Marshall Islands, and then on to the ambassador for Egypt, and later on tonight, the foreign minister for Malaysia. So it's a heavy day's work, and it's all about this country's better cooperation and better advancement of our trade and our values and the rules-based system that keeps the countries like us going. There's a lot of work involved here, but no, they don't get that either.
No, they don't. Once again, Winston, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you very much, and good luck to your show and your listeners.
They love hearing you on the show, Winston, so they'll be very pleased to hear this.
No, thank you very much. Excellent.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Chris Hipkins might think Winston Peters is like a drunk uncle at a wedding, but after his shellacking about wine biscuits, he may be a bit more circumspect in doing that again. Winston certainly isn't holding back with his contempt for the lying legacy media, and nor should he. Tell me your thoughts on what Winston had to say by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Simon Lusk is a seasoned campaigner and David Farrar is a polling expert. Today they're joining me for a panel discussion about Labour leader Chris Hipkins and what the Labour Party needs to do to become relevant again. Simon and David are both on the line now. Let's get cracking. Okay, so we've got a first here for The Crunch, a panel discussion. With me is Simon Lusk. Welcome, Simon.
G'day, Cam.
You're a political campaigner, lobbyist, and you're going to give us some insights into what on earth is going wrong with Labour at the moment. And then we've got David Farrar, who's a polling genius and a political tragic as well. Welcome, David.
Good to be here.
Right, so let's just kick this discussion off a little bit with the little contretemps that occurred between Christopher Hipkins and Winston Peters. David, I'll go to you first. What are your thoughts on that inanity? Well, that's the way I see it from Hipkins. What do you think?
My constant advice to all MPs, let alone leaders from what you call the two major parties, is never pick a fight with the small party, because it's great for them. It's terrible for you. You're meant to be the alternate prime minister taking on the major party of government. And if you're trading insults with the party on 6%, well, that's not going to get you back into government. It's just going to make people think, well, maybe you're a 6% party too.
I mean, Hipkins didn't do well out of that engagement. He put out a press release, called Winston Peters a drunk uncle, and Winston Peters slammed him back and said, you can talk, you'd get drunk on a wine biscuit. I mean, how do you recover from that?
Well, you just go quiet and move on, basically, because it's one of these things where you think, oh, it's a great scandal. Winston's used some rhetoric which I don't like, etc. But look, voters care about inflation, schools, hospitals. They really don't give a flying F about two politicians critiquing each other's speech.
Simon, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah, we always back Farrar's judgment because he's got the numbers and we're guessing. But I would have exactly the same advice. Ignore Winston. Come out with a policy. If you get into trouble, have a dead cat to throw on the table. But all it did was give Winston another probably 12, maybe 18 hours of news cycle. And likely they'll do something stupid in the House today. And, it's like, come on, guys, get your act together. This fighting Winston isn't going to win you the next election.
I can't remember a politician who's ever got one over Winston when it comes to verbal entanglements. There isn't one that I can remember.
Possibly Longy in his day.
Maybe.
No, definitely.
But it was probably a draw, really, to be fair. So is this symptomatic, though, of where Labour is at, that they're chasing parked cars or any passing car to see if they can get some traction on anything. Is that where they're at the moment, Simon?
I just don't think they've got a strategy. And the strategy isn't particularly complex. They've got to work out a way to get to 61 seats in the next parliament. And, I think if you said to Hipkins, mate, how are you going to get to 61 seats? He wouldn't know. And I don't think anyone in Labour would really know. And I think it's pretty obvious, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Farrar, 61 seats for the centre-left probably includes the Greens and the Maoris.
Must.
And that really puts Labour in a position where they've got to work out whether they want to cede some ground to the Greens and to the Maori Party and take votes off the right, or whether they want to scrap over a small number of votes on the left. And I don't think they've actually worked that one out either.
No, look, they haven't got a strategy, or not an apparent one yet. And there's two big things I think they've been doing wrong. And to be fair, they're not the only opposition that does this wrong. The first thing is no humility. They had the biggest decline in support of any government in history, two-party system. They went from 50 to, 26, 27%. That's massive. But Hipkins says, I can't think of anything we do differently. They're now spending all their time attacking National for repealing the policies that National vowed to repeal. And these are the very policies, which is why National won the election, because they were unpopular. So you need to be actually going a bit quiet for your first 6-9 months in opposition. You need to be listening. You need to work out what you did wrong. Not just to continue, we were right on everything. The people are wrong.
I mean, we had Grant Robertson come out and saying he wishes he had borrowed more. I mean, just on the weekend, that's what he came out with as his final statement and probably his last media appearance. I wish I'd borrowed more. I mean, the guy was unfit to be a finance minister. Absolutely unfit to be a finance minister. Probably the worst finance minister since Arnold Nordmeyer. But maybe even worse than that, because the legacy of his debt is yet to be realised, and they haven't even said sorry. It's like Elton John's song, sorry seems to be the hardest word. Politicians can't seem to say sorry for the mistakes they've made.
Yeah, even if there's a disagreement over, policy, the fact is, on some of their major pledges, Kiwi Build, they made 2% of their target. On a billion trees funded 4%, electric cars 15%, and 0% for Dunedin Hospital rebuild, and
light rail 0%.
You never hear them say, well, we had good ideas. They might think that we didn't do well enough in delivering. They just say, it's COVID's fault.
Well, I mean, that's the funny thing about delivery, isn't it? Remember, Jacinda Ardern said that this year is the year of delivery. Well, it must have been stillborn.
Well, I thank you for that, because that's what actually encouraged me to, at the end of the year of delivery, look at how Labour were tracking against their promises. And it became so popular, I now do that every year, and I've just done those stats you just heard. I've just published that, we can now look at their entire 6 years in office. And again, Jacinda, she promised the two big things were climate change and child poverty. Well, kids and material hardship went up slightly, and greenhouse gas emissions went up. And these were the centre of her political being.
And then you mentioned about, Simon mentioned, you need to be able to count to get to 61 seats in Parliament, and you can't get there without the Greens and the Maori Party, both of which seem to have gone completely crazy.
Yeah, and look, Labour it is a tough decision they have to make, because you don't just want to be in government. You do want to be in government with a decent proportion of the vote. And they have lost a lot of Maori votes to Te Pāti Māori, and they've lost the youth vote quite convincingly to the Greens. And they have to either say, as Simon said, do we try and get that back? Which will be really hard, because how do you out-radical, Te Pāti Māori talking DNA, genetic superiority, white supremacy, genocide, or the Greens who think it's cruel to not let people terrorise their neighbours. So that's not a good strategy. They do have to go for the centre vote, aim for that, but their worry is, well, if we don't get our votes back from the two more left parties, we remain a party in the 20s. Even if, they gain 3%, they're still going to be on 29%.
But isn't there I've been around a long time, like you two have. Isn't it best they just ignore the Greens and the Maori Party and that support that went in the last election because they couldn't bring themselves to vote New Zealand First Act or National, will just naturally drift back there? And so you're better off just to focus on, for want of a better term, the enemy, which is the three governing parties.
Yeah, and they also need to work out what their brand is. I did laugh on election night when Chris Hipkins said, we still remain the party of the worker, because actually National got more votes from blue-collar voters, according to exit polls I've seen, than Labour did. And that's not new. This is actually happening around the world. So they're not the party of the working class anymore. Are they going to be the party of, university elites or the party of urban progressives, etc.? But you can't be everything to everyone.
Simon, what's your thoughts on that?
I just constantly think about what Tony Abbott did in 2010, and he was their third leader in the first term of opposition, and he nearly won. And what would Tony Abbott do? I'm pretty sure Tony Abbott would have one look at what's going on and go and have a chat to the Greens and the Maoris and say, you guys get on with it, we're going to leave you alone, and we're going to bash the crap out of the governing parties, and we'd like your help. We'll coordinate, but that's our game plan. We are just going to absolutely hammer the hell out of the government and make Chris Luxon look really, really, really bad, and we're going to try and make ACT look bad, and we're probably going to leave Winston because we might just need him, even though we're saying we don't. But, the first thing I would have done after the election if I was Hipkins was send bloody Winston a case of whiskey and say, mate, I got that one wrong, didn't I? And that would make it easy to get to 61. But obviously he is too thick to do that. But it is, Farrar, what do you reckon Abbott would do if he was running Labor here?
Well, Abbott was probably the most effective opposition leader we've seen. He just focused on the government mercilessly and totally out of favour with the media and the elites. But as you say, he almost did it. And then, of course, he did win the time after. So he did a couple of things. One was he was true to himself. He never pretended to be anything he isn't. And he ran very good campaign against the government. Of course, the government gave them, they were infighting themselves so much. So no great surprise there. I think, though, Labour does, rather, of course, they need to attack the government. They also do need to, though, be doing, what you call the sort of listening thing, which is, what did we do wrong? What do people want from us, etc.? Not the sort of, almost arrogance, there's nothing we would have done differently.
They're not going to do that until they get a change of leader. And it was because I'll make a prediction right now. Labour will muddle along until they change their leader, and then they'll get this new leader who will announce to us with great gravitas as he does it, I'm going to go on a tour around the provinces and I'm going to listen to what people say. They all do it every single time. It's ridiculous. They should be doing it anyway when they do their usually Thursday little trips around the country. But they're going to say that, but they're going to waste heaps of time getting there. And the reason I think that they're going to waste heaps of time getting to that point is that right now they probably can't afford any polling. And so they've got no information other than public polling that's out there.
Yeah, that's just bullshit, Cam. Like, those bastards should go and raise some money and get some proper polling. I mean, they're just useless.
But they've always been bludgers, haven't they? I mean, they've always piggybacked off Talbot Mills, expecting things for free. And the National Party goes and pays for its polling.
Yeah, see, I disagree a little bit with what Farrar said about going out and listening. I don't think that you learn anywhere near as much as listening as if you spend a whole heap of money on proper research. So lots of polling and lots of focus groups. And focus groups are really expensive, but they tell you what the target voters think. And what the regression analysis, Farrar, would you include that? If you were, if someone come and said, Pinko, mate, we want you to do all the research for Labor that you can, what's your budget? and gave you a free hand, what would you do? You'd do polling, focus groups. Would you do the regression analysis as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The regression analysis is what helps tell you what actually moves the party vote. It's almost the most important part of it, so you're not guessing. And the focus groups, why you do the listening thing isn't so much as an alternative to focus groups, because in focus groups you can really get into the detail, but it's showing a bit of humility. And if you have a new leader especially, it's a chance to introduce them. People are interested in the new leader, etc. So it's not that you're going to sit down and analyze the feedback from 50 public meetings, but it's allowing you to get a bit in touch with the community. In Wellington, people get so out of touch. They think everyone is an urban liberal. So part of the reason you do a bit of a tour is actually to talk to normal people. But that's why you do the focus groups too, because they're the ones where you don't just find out what people say on the surface, but you get underneath the why. Why do people feel this? This might be a top tier issue, but is it a second tier issue that they're really concerned about, like law and order?
So I'm listening to what I'm hearing in the back channels and to find out how serious I need to take Labor. And until they do this detailed research and spend some money, and until they fundraise, I'm not taking them that seriously. In the same way that, Farrar, you told me in 2002, when National got a hiding, their polling budget increased. And then in 2017, it went down to almost nothing. And they were National were just useless because they didn't have the numbers. And, I'm pitching for Talbot Mills. They need to go and get a whole lot of money to Talbot Mills to get them to do the necessary work. And what I'm hearing is they're not paying Talbot Mills anything. It's just useless.
Yeah. Look, I haven't heard that, and obviously I have a bit of a financial interest in this, but the analogy I use is doing good research is making sure all the money you spend on ammo is hitting the right targets. Because if you don't understand what's going to shift voters, then all your other spend can be an absolute waste. It's not even that. If your brand is crap, if people just don't like you, then it doesn't matter how much money you spend. And the example I always give was the poll Lord Ashcroft did of the Conservatives under Michael Howard's leadership, where he asked people, what do you think of the Conservatives' immigration policy? And around 69% of people loved it. But in another poll, when they were told it's the Conservatives' immigration policy, only 40% of people loved it. So what that told you was their brand was so terrible that doesn't matter how many good ideas they came up with, they weren't going to win. And that's the point at which you say, we need to change leaders. Our brand is too tied to an unpopular leader.
It's like David Cunliffe, when he was the leader, they came out with these, vote positive billboards that didn't mean anything. Like, vote positive, what does that mean? And it was everywhere, and they're sort of trying to justify it. And then all of a sudden, Nicky Hager writes Dirty Politics, and vote positive all of a sudden becomes clear that they were hand in glove with each other. But the problem is they had a leader who was sorry for being a man, and he just made a pig's ass of the entire campaign, and National's vote actually went up.
Got a majority on the night, if I recall.
Yeah. Because I live in way out of big cities and now live in the country, and most people don't know who Nicky Hager is. They certainly don't know who the three of us are. They don't really care about dirty politics or vote positive. They sort of look up, do I like that person? Are they going to do anything for me? And if not, well, they've probably lost interest. And, I think that Jacinda showed that they looked up and said, yeah, I do like you. And, that made a difference, but the previous leaders hadn't. And that's something that I don't think that the people in Wellington, as Farrar's just said, the liberal elite in Wellington who think everyone's a trendy urban liberal, well, they're just not. The people I run into, I have a rule in Hawke's Bay, I never talk politics unless someone brings it up with me. And it's very rare for anyone to bring it up with me. They all know what I do, but they're just not very interested. And, that's the baseline that you've got to work with. People who really don't care and are not that interested in, well, do I like them? Are they competent? Will they do anything for me? And I don't know that Labor could answer those questions.
Yeah, in terms of this of what you call normal person, I always used to rely on good friends of mine who were parents, and it's what they talk about at school pickup and drop-off. It used to be what they talk about in the smoko room. And again, since I've become a parent and do the school pickups and drop-offs, a lot of people know I'm in politics, do polling, blogging, etc. 99% of the conversations are never about politics. Occasionally, something comes up where people are talking about, like the accommodation allowance we saw recently. And that's how I know when it's got cut through, is when normal people actually start talking about it. But, 99% of them want to talk about the playground, the weather, or how your day went, not, GCSB or paying or.
Is part of Labor's problem really that at the moment they literally are chasing every passing car and attaching themselves to complex political issues with simplistic arguments? A good example would be a referendum on Maori wards. I know I can almost predict what Labor's going to do there. They're going to say that this is anti-democratic, that the government is racist and trying to get rid of them, all that sort of stuff. Is this the out-of-touch nature of the Labor Party now, that they just don't actually understand what ordinary people think about these things?
Well, they can't read because they've got to be able to read previous referendum results. I think there's been one successful one, and that was in Wairoa, where the population was 58% Maori. It's like they're just not very smart. But I think the problem on the complex issues is they haven't actually sat down and thought about how the complex issues fit into their strategy and what people are hearing when they start going on about, like the referendum on Maori wards is a good example. If they go too far on taking the side of anti-democratic Maori wards by rights, that's going to piss off a lot of New Zealanders and it'll cost them votes. And, that they're going to do something similar. I mean, for how long have they been going on about a capital gains tax and navel-gazing over that? And it's just not going to happen. And more importantly, I mean, I don't know anyone that's come and told me they want a capital gains tax. I've heard plenty of people say, who do I give money to stop one?
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't want one, but I want them to propose one, because as a former co-founder of Taxpayers Union, let me tell you, that really gets people worked up.
But I'm sure that ACT, National and New Zealand First, raised vast amounts of money on stopping the capital gains tax. But, you go to a school in Hawke's Bay for the school pickup and no one is talking about the capital gains tax. And, why would you spend time talking about that rather than just saying, no, we're not going to talk about that. That's just nonsense. Let's not talk about dumb stuff. And talk about, what is the defining issue of our times? And Farrar, probably it's got to have something to do with cost of living, and cost of living in New Zealand is really linked to excessive regulation that makes everything way too expensive to do. So cost of living is really cost of housing, and that's the regulatory environment. How would they solve it? Well, Kiwi Build was a complete disaster because they were a pack of useless student unionists arguing about stuff. They needed to fix the planning system and free up a whole lot of land and build a whole lot of houses, and they couldn't get their head around that. I don't know.
Worse is Phil Twyford did, but he then didn't implement his own policy. He said, we need to get rid of the rural-urban boundary in Auckland. New Zealand Initiative, others all cheered on. Productivity Commission said that artificially, multiplies it. And they go into government and then they dropped it.
It staggers me that people took Phil Twyford seriously at any point. I mean, the guy was just a motor mouth. And I still remember him, this is the thing that annoys me about all politicians, is they put on the fluoro vest and the hard hat and the safety glasses and the earmuffs, and they walk around jabbering inanely, looking stupid. And Twyford was terrible at it. I remember one TV segment, he was there in his hard hat and his fluoro vest saying, oh, look, you've got to have big balls to do what we're going to do. Really? Well, what did you do? What is it, 2%? Or that you found, David, on Kiwi Build, 2% of delivery?
2.1 maybe, if we're being generous, yeah.
2.1. I mean, it's pathetic. They said they were going to deliver 10,000 houses a year. But 10,000 houses a year for 10 years. Well, they had 6 years. Where are the houses? And they said, they're going to be affordable homes. And well, that changed, didn't it? Because everything became expensive.
Yeah.
So, how do you do that?
Came to about barking at every car. It does happen to more than one party in opposition. And
we saw National do it multiple times.
Yeah. And there's two reasons for it. One is you think whatever's the issue of the day in Parliament and the House is actually important to people. So you throw out your strategy of we want to talk about education and health. But the other thing is the media do play a bit of a role in this, in that they come to you on the issue of the day. And unless you're incredibly well disciplined, they will take what you say on that issue and ignore what you're trying to talk about. Now, there is a way around that. It is called discipline. It is getting that across. Luxon did quite well when Labour ministers kept imploding, where he kept saying, I don't want to be talking about them. I want to be talking about cost of living, which at least got across. He's not focused on that. And yeah, most parties in opposition, they're just desperate for something that will chink away at the government. So whatever comes up, you have a go at, but most of them won't work.
Well, we're seeing that now, aren't we, with the attacks in the media on Winston for his State of the Nation, saying that he's comparing co-governance with Nazi Germany. Winston's just sitting there laughing. He's laughing his head off at this, at the media doing this. And you mentioned the media come at you with the issue of the day. It's their issue that they want raised. It's not the general public's issue that they want raised. And we've seen how out of touch the media are, because they're running campaigns now on social media and just getting absolutely slaughtered. Every time we hear about a media company in trouble and shedding jobs, you can hear the echoes along the streets of celebration at their demise. And they're so out of touch, they don't actually realise we don't like them.
Well, I did note that the CTU has launched on their campaign site a sort of Save Our Jobs with all the TVNZ stars, etc. And I had take a look at sort of how many signatures it had so far, and it was at around 700 after 24 hours. And you'd think saying with all the stars behind it, you would be at 40, 50,000, etc. But I think that tells you, no one likes people losing jobs. But as Liam here pointed out, entire swaths of people in the mining, the gas, oil industries have lost their jobs as government have done policies, etc. So they don't really see when it's one particular sector that should be held up on a pedestal.
Yeah. Well, how are they going to rehabilitate? I mean, I interviewed Michael Bassett, and he says that the last government was the worst government in living memory. And even when you push him and try and think about all of the governments in New Zealand, no, worse than all of them. How do you recover from that? How do you rehabilitate your party from the impression where a political tragic like Michael Bassett, who was a Labour minister, thinks that the Labour Party were the worst government ever? Yeah. And aren't they setting National up to run, remember the black budget type campaign for years and years and years?
Yeah, I mean, Labour's problem will be when they attack the government on health education stats, everyone's going to remember how much worse, despite the extra spending under them. Look, there will be a leadership change, and we just have to look at the history of MMP. National in 2002 was in the 20s, and then they changed to Don Brash, and they went up to high 30s, 40s. Labour spent their entire opposition in the 20s, and then Jacinda came in and she shot them up to high 30s, 40s. And National, to be fair, was actually polling well under Simon Bridges, but then combination of COVID response and his personal favourability, they dropped to 30s and 20s, and they stayed there pretty much in the 20s until Christopher Luxon came in. And again, if you look at all three of them, it's quite interesting because the 3 or 4 who really made a difference were Brash and Key and Jacinda and Luxon. And most of them weren't your typical politicians. Key and Luxon and Brash were also seen as people who made their careers outside politics and were now coming in to serve. Whereas Jacinda had a phenomenal communications ability, popularity, etc. So Hipkins will go, no doubt. Probably the replacement Cepoloni, because she's the only one who hasn't been involved in scandal who's quite competent, and she is the deputy leader. But is she going to be enough of a turnaround to not be associated with the last government? Probably not. So really it's going to be, have they either got a star on the backbench like Camilla Bellich or Arena Williams, or is there someone going to come in next time who's their potential leader who can get people to look at them again?
Simon, what are your thoughts on that? Can they be rehabilitated simply by changing to Carmel Cepoloni?
Well, I think that if she went and spent a few years or a few months working out what Tony Abbott did and then got out and raised the money to do the proper polling and came up with a nice set of 4 slogans to bash National with, I think she has a chance. I just don't think she's got a clue and she won't do it.
And what Simon said about some slogans, and Winston's usually very good at this, people will remember around 3 things max. Sometimes, pledge cards have 5 or 7, but really 3 or 4. So you need to, again, do the research, but work out what are the 3 issues we're going to campaign on for the next election and hammer them for 2 years. Not change them every month, etc., but work it out. 12 months should be enough to do that. And then make that your brand, that we're the people who are going to fix the school system or, improve the health system, however you do that. But again, their problem is all the stats went backwards under them. So they have to pick ones that have believability.
If you say you're going to fix the school system, then I can see National more likely act piping up in the House and saying, what do you mean fix the school system? Under the school system that you were running, we had attendance levels of 40% at schools, and now we've got attendance levels at 75%. We've already fixed it. We don't need you. Thanks very much.
Just a big problem. They're going to run into those. But I think that if we were running the campaign and for Carmel and she was saying, okay, well, how do we do it? So, look, we got it wrong. Those policies weren't good enough, and we made it sure that a whole lot of poor brown kids missed out on a decent education. And under my watch, that's not going to happen. Whānau across the country are going to get educated, and if we've got to punish their parents for not sending their kids to school, we will. And under my watch, all New Zealanders are going to get a great education. May work, but they'll probably end up with the teachers' union going spastic at her, and she'll back down. And, it's not the parents' fault that the kids don't go to school. And so, that's just bullshit. Like, everyone thinks that kids should go to school, and that if they don't, it's the parents' fault. Just come out and say, we are cutting off opportunity for poor brown New Zealanders because we don't make sure they get a decent education. And that'd resonate, but I don't think Labor has got it in them to say it.
Well, no, they're more focused on things like accusing the government of being anti-democratic for using urgency when they used it themselves.
It's just nonsense. It's like no one cares. Farrar, what do you reckon? Do you reckon 1% of New Zealand would understand what parliamentary urgency is?
Oh, it might be 4 or 5%, but yes, it's not a big issue. And as Cam said, Chris Hipkins moved 24 different bills and 1 motion under urgency as leader of the House. What Simon said, though, is so right. And it goes back to, and Simon, of course, has studied hundreds of campaigns professionally, but what Bill Clinton called triangulation, which is you do something which people don't expect from you, they pay attention, and it wedges your opponents to. If Labor came out saying, we're going to increase fines for truancy, National suddenly either look weak for not agreeing, or they'll say, we'll do it too, and then they look like they're following. So to get people's attention, you do have to go with something that will surprise people. Saying we now agree with the Greens on a capital gains tax or a wealth tax isn't going to surprise anyone. That might get them votes from Greens and Te Pāhi Māori, but it's not going to get them votes in the centre.
Well, get them votes from Martin Bradbury, Simon Wilson and Russell Brown, but that's about it.
It's just not going to work. Cam, I think that and something that Farrar's mentioned also, they can't defend their COVID record as being perfect, and they're stupid to try. They should have some humility and say, well, maybe we got some things wrong. Maybe we should have adopted more of a Swedish model. What would we do differently next time? Rather than, oh, no, we were great in COVID. You should all just love us because of how great we were.
Well, it's worse than that, though, Simon, because you had Hipkins come out and say nobody was forced to take the jab. Well, that's just a lie.
Yeah, and we've now got a shortage in the health system because they still won't let a whole lot of unvaccinated people back in.
And in defence, it's nuts.
They could say, look, yeah, that was a mistake. We should reinstate them all. And that would send a message that they reflected and shown some humility. And for the life of me, I can't understand now why you wouldn't want guys back in the military just because they didn't have the jab.
But the military have lost in the High Court and in the Court of Appeal on the mandates that they forced on their staff. And you would have thought they would have given up on doing that. But, oh, no. They've announced they're now going to the Supreme Court to overturn the Court of Appeal. Well, the chances of that happening are almost zero. I mean, they've categorically lost in the High Court and in the Court of Appeal, but they're still going. It's like they've forgotten there was a change of government.
Oh, and Labor have forgotten that they're losing in the court of public opinion because they are defending the indefensible. I mean, it went too far. It worked for a while. And pretty much, Farrar, I think I'm right in saying everywhere in the world there was a big increase in the polling for the government at the beginning of any COVID response. And then it fell away rapidly when people were looking around going, well, this is just bullshit. I'm not that sick. And we don't need to lock down our whole economy. And where Sweden took a much more pragmatic approach where they didn't get sucked in with models that said, oh, lots of people will die, because Swedish people were just a bit sensible and took some responsibility, so they didn't kill their economy. And that's something that Labor could come out and say, look, we got some things wrong, and if there was another pandemic, we would do it differently.
I think that's really important, because the reality is, if there was another pandemic, the social license has gone. There is no way that people would now accept 6 weeks under house arrest at home, only able to walk to the beach, etc. There's no way people would accept, jobs going, employers closing for 2 months. And most of all, I understand even Labor ministers have now acknowledged this, would we close the schools? The evidence is massive that closing schools was the wrong thing to do, because once the kids are out of that education system, it's so hard to get them back in. There's been some great peer reviews between states and the US. So, yeah, there's some stuff they did very well, to be fair, during COVID. But what they don't understand,
marginalising people and demonising.
Sorry, Cam?
Yeah, what they did really well was marginalise and demonise people.
Yeah. Well, no, there are other things in terms of, we were fortunate that we managed to keep the COVID out when there wasn't, when it was a far more lethal strain. And I think that was very beneficial there. But there's a percentage of the population who feel very aggrieved. They lost their jobs, their livelihoods, and this isn't a one-off for them. And Labor has to find a way to say, here's what we did right, but we do regret this, because these people aren't going to forget it for 1 term or 2 terms.
No, forever. We're not going to forget it forever. There's people that are listening to this show will be sitting here nodding their head and going, I'm never going to let those guys forget what they did to me, my family, my business, everything else. And especially what was done to Auckland. They've tacitly, quietly admitted, the Labor Party, that perhaps we locked down Auckland for a bit too long. Instead of actually saying, well, we shouldn't have done that. The anger in Auckland, still with the Labor Party for those lockdowns, is palpable.
And that's a thing that they can easily do well, coming back from and showing some humility. Say, look, we got locking down Auckland wrong, and we got locking down Auckland wrong because we decided we wanted to prop up hotels by having quarantine in Auckland, our biggest commercial centre. And New Zealand First policy was to fly them all into army bases or Air Force bases, have temporary accommodation and have them quarantine there. So if COVID escaped, it didn't cause the biggest economic engine in New Zealand to close. And I mean, from an economic perspective, that makes sense, because it was costing about $1 billion a week to close Auckland. But from a straight polling perspective, I'm pretty sure I remember you telling me, Farrar, that Labor, that was at the third lockdown, their vote just tanked, so they were down around what the Greens were getting. And they got it wrong politically. It just killed them.
Yeah, like I remember complaining to an Auckland friend about the lockdown in Wellington, and my friend just went, "You only had one. Shut the F up." We had 5 or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There's never been any critical analysis of the spending that they allowed under all of these COVID provisions. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. There was multi-millions of dollars spent on laptops so that kids could distance learn using Zoom or whatever. They rolled all this out. Thousands and thousands and thousands of laptops were going to school kids. Well, where the hell are they now? They were given to those people. Where are they? Right? What about the millions of dollars at rack rates that the government was paying to all the motels and hotels around Auckland to run the MIQ? They weren't paying discounted rates for bulk buyout of underutilised resources. They were paying full rack rate. And on top of that, there was restitution clauses to repair all the damage from all the scumbags that were in these places. So it's, how do they recover from that? Because someone should dig into that stuff. And those are golden handcuffs to hang the Labor persistently on over ridiculous, unaccounted for spending. But the Labor Party seems to have this innate ability to say that all spending is good spending.
No, they've just got to come out and say, we got some things badly wrong, and if it happened again, we would do it differently. Well, this is what we would do differently.
And if they don't say it, I thought one of the better things the government's done is expand the terms of reference or the consulting on it for the Royal Commission, because the current terms of reference were basically just going to be a once-over, no real scrutiny of government decisions. But what they're proposing, I think Brooke Van Velden's the lead on this, is to actually ask those hard questions about what went right, wrong, what should we do differently. And Labor, if I were them, would want to come to my own conclusions and get them out with a bit of a mea culpa first, rather than wait for the Royal Commission to come out, where a lot of people probably won't realise that everyone's happy we had a relatively low death toll, etc. But, the delays in the vaccine rollout, when they promised we'd be first in the queue, and many, many other things. I think biggest scandal was the testing, where they refused to do the saliva testing just because they were in a huff with the company behind it, etc. And that could have opened up businesses and universities overnight, basically. So there's going to be, I suspect, some pretty damning stuff come out.
Well, the banning of ivermectin and other cheap things like vitamin D3 and stuff like that, which has been shown multiple times now in peer-reviewed studies to have been a good prophylactic way to treat COVID-19.
Yeah, look,
Cam, that was a scandal.
I don't think that that's the real big thing because, I know you go on about that, but I don't know anyone else that does. And I think that the really big stuff that they got wrong was, MIQ in Auckland, the mandates were way too harsh. And, Hipkins forgot to order the vaccines for 6 weeks. So we were all locked down for longer. I mean,
but it was someone else's fault. It was someone else's fault.
But he was the Minister of COVID Recovery. And I just couldn't believe that there weren't ads. When he became Prime Minister, if I had been running National's campaign, the moment he came out, I go, this bastard forgot to order the COVID vaccines. You can't expect him to run the country. Yes. And, just mock him for all his failures, which were many, many-fold by the time he became Prime Minister.
Well, you look at all his portfolios that he held. Minister of Police, it went backwards. Minister of Education went backwards. COVID recovery, backwards. Everything he did. He is the reverse Midas. He has the literal poo finger. Everything he touched leaves a smear of poo on it. And that's just Hipkins. But all they've got to replace him that you guys can come up with is Carmel Sepuloni. Is there anyone else?
Well, Camilla Balich looks the part, and that counts for a lot. I don't know whether she's necessarily got the support of the party, which isn't a bad thing. But, Labor found the biggest donkey they possibly could find and put her in Mount Albert, nearly lost it to the Greens. I mean, that is a seat that
nearly lost it to Melissa Lee.
Yeah, it's just useless. And they really did pick a donkey instead of someone with a bit of talent. And I don't know that Camilla is that talented, but she certainly looks the part. And you'd think that with her CV being as strong as it is compared to most of the people, it's not as if she was a diversity officer at a university. She's actually a lawyer.
I guess she was also a diversity officer at her university. She was the women's rights officer, but I rate her, but she hasn't held even junior ministerial roles. She's an unknown. I think she'll need time in opposition to prove herself. People talk Kieran, and I like Kieran. If he won his seat, I think there would be the case to be made. This guy's relatable, he's popular, he's electable. But he got trounced in his seat. And that makes it hard to say the guy who got kicked out of his seat and is now a list MP is the messiah who's going to lead us back because he's so relatable.
Yeah, that'd be nah.
Yeah, well, I just don't know that he actually is that relatable, is he?
No, I mean, sure, he's got a bit of fight in him. He'd certainly have more fight than Camilla Bellich. But, yeah, I just don't rate him. He just – here's the thing, right? I look at people and they know they're not being filmed, but they are being filmed. They just are comfortable with themselves. And Kieran McAnulty is a guy who walks around with playing pocket billiards. He's always got his hands in his pockets. I'll add that so does Christopher Luxon. It's something he needs to stop doing, right? But my grandfather always used to say, never trust a man with his hands on his balls all the time. And he's right. You just look at him and you think, you're sloppy. You've always got your hands in your pockets. You always look like the wreck of the Hesperus. You look at your vehicle. Sure, it's an old ute, but it just looks tatty. Even his beard looks tatty. That might sound petty and childish to say that, but it's the blink test. If you look at somebody and you think, oh no, then you're not going to get elected.
We all know if he shaves his beard off, it's all on, or he tidies it up.
Well, he can't really afford to lose any more weight, is he? He's almost got the body of a half-sucked throaty. So, we can't find any realistic leadership things.
No, but we can look at some metrics, because I don't think that anyone really thought that Tony Abbott, despite being a Rhodes Scholar, was going to come in and absolutely smash up Rudd so badly that Labor got rid of Rudd. I think that it is possible to see someone that is determined to copy Abbott's playbook. And, I've already talked about polling. The other thing that I'm looking at is fundraising. And if they're serious about being Prime Minister, they will get out and they will raise a shitload of money and they will be able to fight National with a huge budget. And the budget will start off with research and then it'll be the staff and to get out the vote and just running a good comprehensive campaign, hammering their 3-4 messages, many slogans. And when the donation returns start coming in, you got to look for who are the big donors, and there probably won't be any because Labor think asking for money is beneath them. The unions don't give much because they're just a bit useless here. It's not like in the US where they fund the Democrats. And you never really know what's going on with the small donors, but you hear in the back room what's going on with the small donors, and it's usually not much. And then people will say, oh, well, Labor can't go and raise money from big donors. I'm like, well, that's just bullshit.
Well, Mike Williams did. Fat Tony was good at shaking down money, and they should actually go and give him a call and say, look, how about you and Bob Harvey, who were good fundraisers for the Labor Party, how about you two get together and go and raise us, $500,000 to start with? Mike Williams should be able to shake down $500,000 with about 3 phone calls.
I would have thought so. I mean, I know some of the hardest right businessmen in New Zealand who have huge respect for Fat Tony. I mean, they just love him because while they didn't agree with his politics and they were a bit scared that he was going to bash them if they did anything wrong, he always got back to them. He always treated them with dignity. He would find stuff out. He managed them properly. And he was a great fundraiser. Clark didn't really have any problem with fundraising. And, they go, oh, well, Fat Tony, well, he's in the distant past. Well, yeah. The not so distant past, Stu Nash was able to raise a shitload of money, but he played rugby, drank beer, rooted women. Labor didn't really like him, so they didn't use his fundraising ability.
Well, so did Larissa Wall, but they didn't like her either.
No, common theme. Message if you're an aspiring Labor candidate. Yeah. But they should be able to go out and get money. I mean, Farrar, you built the Taxpayers Union with a few others. You raise more than the political parties in New Zealand most of the time anyway, don't you?
And 80% small dollar donations too. Yeah. If you get a brand that you're gonna fight for what you believe in, and you actually will get results, people can disagree with you on some stuff, but they'll donate to you for the stuff that they see you're effective on.
Well, that's a good point. You've got to be visible on issues that mean something to people. And it seems that Labor is not visible on issues that mean things to people. I mean, let's just run through a few of them, and let's see what you guys think. Where should their position be on these? Should they be in favour, against, or indifferent? I mean, I think those are the three things. And then we'll see what Labor actually is. So let's just run through a list. Let's kick off with Palestine.
Indifferent.
Right? Indifferent, you say? Simon, David, what do you say?
Yep, indifferent too. It's not an issue that's going to determine any votes in New Zealand. It will get people worked up who think strongly on one side or the other, but you're not getting people shifting votes on it.
And I agree with that. I mean, for most people, I mean, I'm not one of them, but most people think, well, it's over there and it doesn't affect us, so we shouldn't really be talking about this. But Labor and the Greens are donkey deep on one side of that issue, so they're getting that one wrong. What about electric cars? David, you're an EV fan. You've even got one.
Yep, no, my second electric car actually. And look, I do think that climate change, in the polling, it's normally a third tier issue, usually 5%, sometimes if it's in the news, 10%. And certainly in Wellington, but where unusual, you're seeing a big uptake in electric cars. So it is an issue you need to be out on and have a policy on, but is not a top tier issue. It's not like, can I afford to buy groceries? Do I have a good hospital? Do I have a good school?
The reality is with electric cars is that traditional Labor voters can't afford them. So it's not an issue that you should be, betting the bank on. Do you agree with that, Simon?
Yeah, and not only that, The Economist, and if there's anyone literate in Labor, they should be reading The Economist to find out what's happening in the rest of the world. They had this wonderful article about how the Greens around Europe, their vote has fallen away. The more the climate change affects the population, the less votes the Greens get, because the Greens solution is to tax us all more and not to mitigate. And for some reason, voters are sensible and they don't like paying more for stuff that makes bugger all difference. So they just, we're not going to vote for you. If I was running Labor's campaign, I think electric cars are okay if you want them, but I'm here to talk about how you put your school lunch in your kid's lunchbox and afford it and can pay down your mortgage or pay your rent. It's not electric cars. It is very, very much a elite income earning issue. Whether you can have an electric car, even if you want one, if you're poor, you can't have one because they're too expensive.
Well, you touch on global warming there as well. I mean, there's this big push for having global warming solutions. My anecdotal evidence around ordinary New Zealanders is no one gives a stuff about it. In fact, I always joke that I think people, would welcome the ability to grow mangoes and pineapples in their back garden, even in Invercargill.
Farrar, what had a great quote about climate change, and he said, when it's a moral issue, we lose on it. When it's an economic issue, we win on it. And to a degree, you saw that with the last Labor government. They talked the talk on it, but then after the regional fuel tax didn't prove popular, Jacinda announced there will be no more regional fuel taxes ever in my time as Prime Minister because
I resigned.
That wasn't popular. And there were a couple of other ones where they backflipped on it. Everyone, wants a good environment and can have a concern about the climate. But if your solution is to tax people thousands of dollars more a year so they can't afford, shopping, then that's not going to be popular.
Right.
And
what about mining?
Shooting 1 in 5 cows.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we all do our bit for climate change by eating steak, don't we? Mining. We all know Labor's position on mining. They don't want it, which is ironic considering they were founded on the West Coast in a mining community.
And I think this is one where they need to be indifferent. They're not going to win any votes from National on mining. They're going to win votes off the Greens and perhaps the Maori Party, and they should be leaving those parties to fight that fight, and they should be taking the fight to National in areas where they can win and they get to that 61 votes in Parliament after the 2026 election. And I just, for the life of me, can't see how getting upset about mining is going to get them to 61 votes. And what do you reckon?
It also goes back to what we were just talking with electric cars. If you do think electric cars are a big part of the future, and I do because I believe in markets, and I do think that the costs of them will come down over time as you get economies of scale. But you know what? They need lots of parts from mines. You know, you need a massive amount of mining to produce batteries for electric cars. There's absolutely no alternative way around it. There's not substitutes for them. So, you know, you can understand some people can be against coal mining because, you know, of the greenhouse gases. But the people who are zealots, who say nothing should ever be dug up out of the ground, well, I guarantee you they have a cell phone. And we all know what the cell phone's made out of, metals.
So, yeah, they should be indifferent at the least on mining. Okay, what about the latest thing that's hit the news where we're hearing lots of wailing from the left about these scumbag state house tenants that are housed by the world's worst landlord, I think you dubbed them as, or maybe New Zealand's worst landlord, Kaingaora.
I think it's a sister soldier moment. They need to come out and smack the shit out of them. You know, these scumbags are wrecking places, they're stabbing people, they're horrible to live next to. It's a privilege to get subsidised housing, and they don't deserve it. You know, if they end up having to spend a few weeks living under a bridge because they can't behave properly, I think most New Zealanders are in favour of them spending that couple of weeks under the bridge so they learn their lesson. And I don't think that we should be paying for it. And, you know, Farrar talked about Clinton's triangulation. That's it's just an opportunity to come down, not on the side that they are at the moment, but on the other side. We got that one wrong. Just allowing people to behave badly didn't work. We've got to change our policy.
It was interesting. They've been a bit muted to the government's policy change that's come out. They've just sort of said, well, you need to also look at this. Well, the Greens, of course, have called it evil and that somehow evicting gang members who terrorise their neighbours is evil. I think leaving them there is evil. But you know, look, if you ask, I haven't actually done polling on this because you don't need to, but I'd say 80 to 90% of New Zealanders, if you ask them, do you think a state house tenant who constantly terrorises their neighbours should be evicted from their state house? Massive, overwhelming support.
You probably get quite good support for saying, should these people be taken outside and shot? I mean, it's just how far the average person thinks it is wrong. And Labor look wrong on this issue, morally wrong. Scumbags shouldn't get away with being scumbags. And they're saying, yes, they should. And that's what the average voter is thinking. Labor wants these scumbags to be allowed to be scumbags, and it just shouldn't happen. And 80 or 90%, I think you're probably closer at 90 than 80, thinking that they should be treated with contempt and punished for their stupidity and their bad behaviour.
Which comes down to school lunches then. Labor's on the wrong side of this one too, aren't they?
Not so sure on that. I think putting aside the economics of it, and also, I guess, the philosophical point, it is potentially an issue where you can get some cut through with the public, because a bit like apple pie, do you want your kids to be well fed? Do you want them hungry at school? The case against is a bit more complicated because you have to say, well, actually, though, it's the parents' job to do it. You make the problem worse by actually not solving the problem of parents who don't prioritise their kids having food. But I do think on the school lunches one, there is one where they may get some traction.
Farrar, in my memory of the people that objected to the useless parents the most were the hardworking, blue-collar parents who were doing their best just to keep their head above water and to look after their kids properly. Is that the case on the school lunches? Like, the three of us are pretty comfortably off. We don't really care one way or another. But if we were doing two jobs and our wife was doing one and the kids had to kick in while they're still at school to help the family out, and they're seeing their scumbag neighbours who play spaceys all night and send their kids to school without the right uniforms and without lunch and taking just complete bludgers, that should be the working people should be the ones that Labor are targeting, isn't it? They're the ones.
Working class people are probably got the hardest views on welfare fraud, just as the people who are most against the bad carrying or residents are the many good ones. They're the ones who suffer the most there. And yes, with school lunches, it does tend to be that the concern comes from people who actually, sort of the liberal elite again, because they just see these poor people, we can't expect them to actually look after their kids. If you're poor, you can't be expected to actually have self-respect and focus on your kids. And they, can't handle, I think, the philosophical thing about, well, why stop at school lunches? Why not school dinners and school breakfasts? I mean, if, kids are going hungry, why shouldn't the state be responsible for feeding every child?
Here's a thing that kills the school lunches argument dead in 5 seconds. Who fed the kids during the lockdowns? There you go. See,
school holidays.
And school holidays. You guys are speechless, right? In school holidays and in the lockdowns, who fed the kids? Their parents did.
Yeah,
and
but
Labor's on the wrong side of that one.
It's an interesting philosophical argument, and I tend to come down on the side as a taxpayer. I'd rather the kids were in school getting educated rather than not in school and behaving badly. And so I'm willing to pay for some of them to have lunch. As much as I object to it, I'm willing to. But I think this is where Labor could take a very strong moral stand and say, look, we just think this is right or we think it is wrong. We stand for these things and we're going to keep standing for them. But at the moment, I don't know what Hipkins stands for. I mean, that guy, what does he stand for? He stands for not liking Winston, not being that competent. What else? He's been around forever. I mean, what's the word cloud for Hipkins, Farrar?
Haven't done one lately. Would be interested.
Okay, last issue, transgender.
Look, I'm going to mention a very, very competent and informative British author called Matt Goodwin, who has all the data on all the issues in Britain, saying how far the liberal elite and the luxury belief class are out of touch with people, average voters. And the trans stuff is the prime example where it's something like 80% of Britons don't believe that biological male should be allowed in biological female-only spaces. They don't believe that you should be able to change your gender with 3 months' notice, self-identifying. It's just, and there's so few of them. It's just gone too far, and it's really not an issue that is going to win Labor the next election. So just leave it alone. They should be indifferent to it and concentrating on the kitchen table issues, and whether we allow men to compete against women in women's sport. I
just think that's wrong, totally wrong.
Yeah, and I think that probably 80% of New Zealanders do, and if you think otherwise, I think, well, you're not fit to be in government if you can't work that out. And if you don't know whether you're Arthur or Martha, I mean, how can we expect you to run a ministry?
David? I think the trans activists, as I call them, it's been incredibly sad. It's probably the biggest own goal I've seen in community sentiment, because up until the last few years where there was the zealotry that you can't have a discussion about it, I think most people were very tolerant of trans individuals. Look, I know, I couldn't even count how many I know, but there's some amazing people I know who are trans. I've also met a beautiful Indian woman who told me she was originally a male, etc. And she's living her life. No one knows. She doesn't make a fuss about it. She's, had the operation, done the change. So we had, I think, actually great tolerance. But then when you come out and you say, you must support us on everything. You must support puberty blockers for children. You must support, no matter what the sport is or the league, people being able to compete based on their gender identity rather than their sex. When you say you can't debate these issues, the vast majority of people have now just said, oh, well, my attitude's again harder on this. No, stuff you. And so I think it's a terrible own goal because I think you can have huge empathy for people with gender dysphoria who are trans, and they should be left to live their lives as they want to, but also be able to just say, look, there are a few areas, if you're in prison and you're a rapist and you're a biological male, there is real concern to put you in a woman's prison. You can also accept, though, that if someone's genuinely transgender, like, take an example, Georgina Barr, the former MP, lovely person, if she for some reason had been sent to prison, I would say, look, it'd be wrong to put her into a men's prison. She's been living life as a woman for 40 years. But what it comes down to is you need a flexibility. You need governments in that to be able to say, okay, here's how we'll deal with the situation. But the trans activists pull out if you have any debate on this, we're going to commit suicide. You're threatening our identity. You want to eradicate us. And that's not the case. It's just that there are challenges. So, I just find it incredibly sad and probably the biggest political own goal. Same-sex marriage, which I campaigned for, how they got that through was by being tolerant, by saying you can have your beliefs, but this is about allowing people who love each other to marry. Why would you want to stop that? But on the trans issue, they've gone for such an aggressive lobby, where J.K. Rowling, is sort of hissed at and demonized. And of course, it doesn't stop. I mean, the big thing you find out is you have all the people on Twitter saying this is terrible, and then she releases a video game that becomes the biggest selling video game of all time. So sorry, that's me going on about, but it just pisses me off actually how badly this issue's been handled by the activists.
See, I was a big fan of gay marriage because I believed not all this hocus pocus about love and everything else. I just thought everybody deserves a mother-in-law.
I think the phrase was, or the slogan was, anyone stupid enough to want a mother-in-law deserves one.
Yeah.
No, but Cam, once again, if someone in Labor is taking the time to read and think about these issues, UK Labor maybe 6 months ago came out and said, look, I think on trans issues, we've gone a little bit too far in favour of inclusion and at the expense of fairness, and we need to edge back towards more fairness. We want to be inclusive, but we've got to be fair. And that means we can't have women sport being dominated by biological males. Fairness means, yes, you are trans, it's unfortunate, but some things are going to be difficult, and some things are difficult for everyone. We all have problems in our lives that are just different. So do you want the very, very, very tiny number of biological males that want to compete against women and win, or do you not? And, I think that Labor need to ask that question. Where is the balance between inclusion and fairness?
As you say, it is a balance. Like, on the sporting issue, you can't have both inclusion and fairness.
No.
But it's not
There's a reason. Otherwise, we wouldn't have male and female competitions, would we? We wouldn't have them. We'd have everybody compete against each other and all the first, second, and third of men.
Yeah. There's things such as you just have an open category, but I actually think you can have a more nuanced approach, which is at school community level. I wouldn't have a problem that people play with their gender identity as long as it's physically safe, because I actually think if you're a 15, 16-year-old, it is really important not to be felt shunned or isolated. But when you get to professional sport, when you get to the Olympics, then I think, have to be very strict on the biological thing. So again, I think you should be able to have a reasonable debate about where you draw the line, but the activist community will say any drawing of the line anywhere is bigoted, and that just turns people off.
Okay, we're going to wind up this little discussion that we've had about how screwed Labor is. Give us a 30-second summary, each of you. Start off with you, David, a 30-second summary on what you think Labor needs to do to start being credible again.
Hipkins should go in around 12 months, 18 months before the election's probably quite good for a new leader. They need to pick the three things they're going to campaign on, start doing the policy work on those. They'll need a signature policy that's exciting, but also isn't typical, not one you just would normally expect from them. And they need to be disciplined. They need to just focus on the core messages, not keep sniping, not getting into fights with Winston.
Simon?
You've got to work out how to get to 61 votes. They want to get Tony Abbott's playbook. They want to make sure that they fundraise properly, and they want to spend heavily on research. And when we know that they're doing those things, we'll start taking them seriously. Until then, we'll just think, well, you guys are probably not going to come back.
Yeah, I agree with both of you on that. We need to have a strong opposition, and right now, Labor is not a strong opposition. They're all over the place, as I keep saying, chasing passing cars. And one day they're going to chase a car and it's going to stop and they're going to run into the back of it at 100 miles an hour. But we do need a strong opposition. We saw what happens when you have a strong government with a weak opposition, and I don't think we want a repeat of the years between 2020 and 2023. And on that note, guys, I thank you very much for coming on The Crunch again, and hopefully the Labor Party will listen to us, but more likely they won't.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Between the three of us in that discussion, there must have been around 90 years of experience in campaigning and polling. Now, I don't think for a second the Labor Party will ever listen to us, but they should. Let me know your thoughts about my chat with Simon and David by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
Did you see the People's Terms for the New Zealand COVID Inquiry campaign, which has just launched at www.covidinquiry.co.nz? The scope of the current COVID-19 inquiry is narrow and restrictive, seeking to learn lessons and not find fault. The People's Terms is an independent, comprehensive and targeted set of terms that fundamentally redefines how the inquiry should operate and what will be reviewed, including the removal and replacement of Commissioners Blakely and Whitehead. If left to their own devices, official bureaucrats will cherry-pick and omit whatever they want to find a result that favours them. Our terms close the loopholes to leave no stone unturned, ensuring such an abuse of power never happens again. Secondly, public pressure works to achieve results. Politics is a numbers game. Your participation in this campaign provides the political pressure required to drive accountability for decisions made during the COVID years. It takes less than 30 seconds to add your name to the People's Terms and safeguard against future government abuse of fundamental human rights. Go to www.covidinquiry.co.nz. That's covidinquiry.co.nz and sign your name today.
This is The Crunch with Cam Slater. Conversations with a side of controversy, right here on RCR.
Now it's time for Cam's Buddies. This week, we'll find out what they think about Winston Peters' State of the Nation speech and the media reaction to it. My producer has them all lined up and ready to go, so let's go now to Cam's Buddies. Welcome to Cam's Buddies, Miles. Good to have you back.
Good afternoon, Cam. How are you this afternoon?
I'm always a box of birds. Just got off interviewing Winston Peters, so, it's a whole heap of fun when you're interviewing him. Speaking of Winston Peters, he made a speech, a State of the Nation speech on the weekend, and the media reported it as him saying he was comparing co-governance to the Holocaust in Nazi Germany. What are your thoughts on the speech and the media reaction to it?
Well, I didn't listen to it. I had a read of it. I'm still applauding, actually. Does that make me a Winstonophile? Yes, it does. But actually, everything he said made a lot of sense. And I'm really pleased that he had the chutzpah to stand up and say it.
Now, you're a bit of an expert on German military and German history. I won't go into too much detail about precisely what you're an expert on. Do you think there was anything wrong with what he was saying?
Not at all. I mean, goodness me. Everything today is just like, oh, my goodness, this is, he might feel upset, they might feel upset. Good Lord. I mean, these people need to rein it in, and they need to understand that they are the ones with the problem, not Winston Peters. Winston Peters is trying to get across a message of how the country needs to change. And I, for one, applaud that. Good on him. And let's be honest, he's a smart politician. He knows darn well how to make the media cycle, or should I say how to dominate the media cycle or the news cycle or whatever you want to call it. And he's doing just that. I think, well done, Winston. You're bringing the concerns forward.
Yeah, I've been sent a little image about the Holocaust and Nazi Germany, and it starts off by saying it didn't start with gas chambers. It started with one party controlling the media, one party controlling the message, one party deciding what is truth, one party censoring speech and controlling the opposition, one party dividing citizens into us versus them and calling on their supporters to harass them. It started when good people turned a blind eye and let it happen. And when I saw that, I thought, you know what? We've seen that. We saw that between 2020 and 2023, didn't we?
We certainly did. And you will recall one day when we decided to have a road trip and left Auckland and saw all the barriers being put up. And on our return, we had like 5-kilometre traffic jams on State Highway 1 as the police were trying to check people into Auckland. And I think I said at the time, this isn't New Zealand. This is like Checkpoint Charlie. This is control above and beyond what was needed at the time. And I still to this day shudder to think how close, well, actually, we weren't even close. We were there. We were in a state controlled by one person and a compliant media.
And on top of that,
I think to Winston Peters.
Yeah. Winston's dead right. They created an us and a them mentality and set about abusing, othering, demonizing, ostracizing the ones that wouldn't comply. It was exactly the same. And I remember when I wrote about it and said, this is the same thing. I had all these people howling, oh, you can't do that. You can't say that about what happened in Germany. It's nothing like what happened. It's exactly what happened. And anybody who's ever been through Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, goes on a pathway through the museum that takes you on those exact same steps. There was little steps all along the way. It didn't start with the gas chambers. It started with the control of the media and a control of one party.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Winston's right in his State of the Nation when he says, look, we're all the same DNA. Let's actually call an end to this elitism that sprung up around, I don't know, there's all sorts of things. There's elitism around disinformation and misinformation. There's elitism around who owns the water. There's all of this elitism. And, you know, if you look at it, Winston's right. It needs to end. It's divisive. It's causing more harm than good. And I believe there is no justification at all. And pin me to the wall and call me a donkey. But if the Treaty of Waitangi is going to be used in this way, then I think the people that are doing it, they are subverting our great nation. And I don't think it is something that should continue. I think it should be nipped in the bud. I think that people have had enough.
Well, you know, the media are the ones who have actually misrepresented what Winston Peters said. He never said that co-governance was the same as Nazi Germany. He never said that that co-governance was like the Holocaust. He simply said if you have policies that are based on the superiority of one race, that leads to disaster. And he's absolutely right, 100% on that.
Correct. And isn't it interesting? Just a few short days ago, the media were wailing and weeping about how they have lost eyeballs or advertisers' dollars to the extent that they've had, and trust, to the extent that they've had to close down. Well, now, in a split second, we can see why. It's unbelievable.
You're 100% right. It is exactly the reason why people no longer trust the lying legacy media. They just keep telling lies and they expect us to keep sucking it up, and we see them. We can see what they're about. And every time they announce more job losses, there's this thunderclap of hoorays from across the nation that damn near deafens me.
Yeah, and the other thing is Hipkins needs to pull his head in. Who is he? Is he the head of the nasty party? What's all this pettiness calling Winston a drunk uncle? But I tell you what, Winston had the last laugh. He had a good old serve on the whining Hipkins, and I think Hipkins got a slap and has his tail between his legs at the moment.
That's exactly right. And that's exactly what I just talked about with David Farrar and Simon Lusk. And on that note, Miles, I'll let you get away. I know you've on a timeline, and I've got Lindley waiting to come in, so I better leave you. Thanks for your call.
Okay, thanks, Cam. We'll catch you next week.
Okay. Welcome to Cam's Buddies, Lindley. Good to have you back again.
Oh, hi, Cam. Yes, good to hear from you. Are you well today?
Of course I'm well. I'm always well. Even if I'm not, I'll say I'm well.
Well, it's not that long ago you were complaining about a sore head, you know. I didn't know what had happened to you.
Oh, well, I don't know what happened either, other than I took a shortcut through the hand basin in the bathroom on the way to the floor.
Oh, not wise.
No, it hurt like hell, but I'm a Comanche. We don't complain about these things. We just get on with it.
Exactly.
Now, our topic
What's
this
subject
week
today?
Yeah, subject today is Winston Peters' State of the Nation speech. Did you see it? Have you read it? And the reaction from the media about it.
Yes, yesterday the headline shot across my iPad of the scandalous things that Winston Peters had said. So I thought I'd better listen to it. So yesterday I listened to it twice, as a matter of fact. And sure enough, it was taken completely out of context. They're just fueling the flames of division yet again, haven't learned a thing. But I'd like to try and explain to listeners who might not know this, but I think a lot will, what's actually happening here.
Go for it.
Okay. Mainstream media is embroiled in radical left-wing ideology. And I think it's not a matter of them not learning. I think they actually think that their duty is to convert New Zealand to their way of thinking. Quote Winston Peters, woke cultural Marxism is what he said. And
you'll laugh, don't you? He's dead right.
He is dead right. And they're in a job, which you all know, where they can make or break people, and they do. They are absolutely shameless and relentless in this pursuit. Now, why don't they change? Well, we can track the source of their so-called news right up to the top, and that's the billionaire mainstream media magnate George Soros, a self-confessed left-wing ideologist who's obsessed with, quote, this is his quote, influencing the minds of the public worldwide. And his chain of influence is carefully crafted right down to the naive journalists at the bottom who unwittingly spew his beliefs. And it's sobering to know that as a young student, he assisted the Nazis to confiscate his fellow Jews' prize assets as they were led away to their awful fate. In a 1998 TV interview, I don't know if you've seen it, when he was asked if he felt any guilt, he replied, no, I don't. And this is the man that is the chief source of our news and left-wing government policies as well, which we've suffered for the previous 6 years. Now, Winston Peters, he's a right-wing fly in the ointment, isn't he? And worse still, he calls the media out. And the Nazi comment, which I've gone over so many times, he basically said the insidious creep of racist co-governance that spread through legislation in the public sector everywhere, he said, and then he went on with some other stuff, and he said it was a race-based theory where some people's DNA was better than another's. And he repeated that, didn't he?
That's actually what Rari Waititi said. He said everybody knows that Maori DNA is superior to other DNA. That's what he said.
That's right, and that's what Winston was referring to by those people, and I think he said, and their fellow travellers or something. Yep. Anyway, then he said, I've seen that philosophy before. I've seen it in Nazi Germany. We all did. Now, I actually take umbrage at Luxon not standing up for this. I think we need to remember it. Does he think that Nazism is a fantasy? And I think we need to remember history so that we can see the beginnings of what may be a repeat performance. And I think that's what Winston actually meant. And I also think if that is what he meant, I think he was dead right. And has Luxon forgotten that thousands of New Zealand men went to war for this cause? My father was one of them on the warship Leander, and a Japanese torpedo tore a hole in its side, and my father was in amongst the 26 men killed in the boiler room. And if he'd been a couple of metres the other way, he would have been one of the 26. Now, had that not been the case, if he had been standing right where the 26 were, well, I wouldn't be here today, would I?
Yep.
And I think that Luxon and the others who criticise these comments about bringing up the Holocaust and things like that, I think they need to wake up, because this did happen and this can easily happen again, and it damn near happened, the beginnings of it, in the COVID thing. You know, people were running around, if they were vaccinated, they were looking hatefully at other people who weren't and calling them out. You know, you could see it in the beginnings of it.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I could anyway.
No, it was like that. That, you know, I've been through the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, Yad Vashem, and, you know, I had always wondered how the hell did the Jewish people let this happen to them? And when I went through that museum, I finally understood, because what was done in Nazi Germany was exactly what was done here during the pandemic. There were little tiny steps along the way. First of all, they said, okay, look, we really just want you to wear a little star so that we know who you are. Well, we had vaccine passes, right, so we could know who people were vaccinated or unvaccinated. Then they said, oh, well,
that's
right. You can't go to those swimming pools, but there's a swimming pool over here you can go to, and only your people with the little yellow stars, you can go to that swimming pool. Or in New Zealand, we said we weren't told that you couldn't go to restaurants, get your hair cut, do anything if you were unvaccinated. And then they said, oh, look, if you own a business, we'd really like that to be majority owned by Germans. And so they then said, well, we're going to take those shares that you've got in that company, and you can still have shares, you can still have the job there. It's no difference, just a little change. And then after that, of course, they said, no, you can't even work here anymore. And, oh, no, you can't have any shares anymore. And, oh, by the way, we need you to move. And it's all these little tiny steps. And all along the way, everyone went, oh, okay, well, that's not so bad. I can cope with that. And then the next step came and said, oh, okay, that's not so bad. I can cope with that. And the next minute they're listening to music on the railway siding leading into the showers. You know, and we came, you know, perilously close to totalitarianism We did have it to a certain extent, especially when the vaccine passes and the vaccine mandates came about and the lockdowns, show us your papers, all of that sort of behaviour. And so Winston Peters is 100% right in my book that we should learn the lessons of history so that it's never repeated again. And if we start going down the pathway of separating people out because they have special DNA or they had the right ancestors, then that's where we're heading. And he's right on that.
I totally agree, and I think his words were carefully chosen. The insidious creep, that's what he said.
Yeah.
The insidious creep of racist co-governance. So to say that he said co-governance was Nazism was completely incorrect. He said that the insidious creep of racist co-governance. That's what
right.
he said. And the headlines, right across the news the next day they were so distorted, and, Winston Peters is one of the people that they want to break. When I said make or break, they want to break him because he represents the right wing, and they hate that. They're just pushing an agenda. I mean, we talked about them last week, that they sort of were stupid and couldn't learn, but I think it's way above that. I think they think they're the chosen one, to convert the world.
Well, Winston's not necessarily right-wing, but he is conservative, and they're very liberal. And so, they want to bring him down. But, just look at the TV1 News headline on Tuesday night. What Winston is claiming he meant. Has he been told off by the PM? It's so juvenile. It's so puerile. It's the media who misreported what Winston said, and they're trying to get him told off. No wonder he's clapping back at them.
Well, and he's doing it very well. And, they had another crack at him for telling lies about the bribery. But, that wasn't a lie. They're the ones that are lying. But they absolutely were offered the money under conditions.
Exactly. You can have this money if you agree to these conditions. That was it. Quite simple. I mean, I run a media outlet. I looked into the Public Interest Journalism Fund, took one look at the terms and conditions and said, we won't be applying for this because I refuse to adhere to those conditions. And so we didn't.
Exactly.
And I didn't have it. And I took a stand. And yes, financially, it wasn't good for me or the publication to do that. But we had principles, and there's no way we were going to sign those away for a few, silver coins, which is exactly what the media did. They took the money, they ran the lines, and then they all stand there and go, but it wasn't a bribe, and we weren't doing what we were told by the government. Well, funny, you got exactly the same viewpoint as the government. You were running propaganda for them.
I know, and then they repeat, he's telling lies. You see, they've got this business mastered, First of all, they hypnotise you, and then they keep repeating one-liners all the way through. And they've, in Winston Peters, and, I know he's a bit mercurial, but they have created a brand for him of can't be trusted. And they, at some stage in whatever they write, they always have that word in there of can't be trusted, untrustful.
Yep.
And they've created that brand for him.
Exactly. They've created the brand. They smear and besmirch him, and then they get upset when he says, I'm calling you on your bull dust. And then they get upset and take high umbrage. I can't wait for them all to collapse. They really deserve it.
Oh, I really felt, when I went over that speech yesterday, I thought, actually, it'll be a good thing if they just totally collapse. They're just so out of order, and they are running roughshod all over New Zealand, as the government did. In fact, they've become the opposition. I mean, before they were the government, now they're the opposition, aren't they?
Yep. Well, that's what I think. Because the media have become the opposition, and perhaps we should start calling them. That's what we should start calling them, the media party. But none of them have got the guts to actually stand for election. They wouldn't take the rejection, but they carry on like they are the opposition.
Well, that's exactly what I meant. They literally are the opposition at the moment because they rubbish anybody on the side of the new coalition government. They they're branding Luxon as a sort of an overprivileged elitist, really. And talking about elite, why are they calling all these militant, or not all these, because not many, these militant Maoris, why are they calling them elitists? They're not elite. You know, I watched Willie Jackson in an interview a while ago. I was absolutely horrified. He is not an elite person. Elite means somebody that...
He's worth several $1 million, has lots of houses in Auckland. You know, so he's not poor.
Well, that's wealth, but it doesn't mean he's elite. Elite is a very special
I tend to think that they are. Tend to think they are because they're in positions of power. They're either high up in iwi or spokespeople for various things. They are the elite of Maoridom, and they don't represent the everyday citizen who happens to be Maori at all. And so they do have an elitist attitude, and that, you know, they run radio stations and media outlets and, you know, all sorts of trusts and all of those sorts of things. They're handling millions and millions of dollars. But whilst you say that's wealth, that kind of puts you into the elite as well.
Yeah, well, I suppose if you look at it that way, you could, but I guess I'm a little bit old-fashioned, and to see Kiri Te Kanawa there, now she's an elite person in my mind.
Yes.
You know,
I agree with you.
Yeah, there's a person who's really made a mark on the world.
And not everybody gets to sing not everyone gets to sing at a prince's wedding, do they?
No, they don't. And so I don't see Willie Jackson. I mean, I just only saw a clip and I stopped and watched it because I thought I might be having to talk about that, but that subject didn't actually come up. But it was a political program on AM breakfast, which I don't watch. And it was just terrible. They just laughed and cackled and carried on all the way through it. And I'll tell you what, his command of English is certainly absolutely atrocious, isn't it? It was awful. And I thought, well, it's no wonder nobody wants to watch it. And goodness knows what he's got to say about the State of the Nation speech. It'd be something really horrible, wouldn't it?
Oh, it was funny watching. It was Lloyd Burr, I think his name was, that you're referencing. He just looked completely flummoxed as Winston Peters poured him back into his bottle.
Yes.
Right. Well, Lindley, I think we've run out of time. I've got Jack on the line next, and he's waiting. So I better say goodbye to you, and we'll talk next week.
Okay. See you later, Cam.
Okay,
bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Welcome to Cam's Buddies, Jack. Good to have you back.
Good, Cam. Earlier tonight.
Yeah, a little bit earlier. Paul's away, so you know you get a quicker slot, so you can. I'm just going to take you away from the news a little bit, but that's all right. Hey,
yep.
I don't know if you caught up with Winston Peters' State of the Nation speech on the weekend, and then the ensuing debacle in the media as they misrepresented and outright lied about what he was saying. And what I'm interested in what your thoughts are.
Well, I didn't hear all of his speech, but like you, or you would have heard all his speech, but I heard all the aftermath of it, I suppose the guts of it, for want of a better expression. First of all, I have to say I like Winston, so I'm biased in what I say. On the other hand,
nothing wrong with being biased, Jack.
Yeah. Winston would say it like I would say it myself. I'm sick to death of that painted face, cowboy hat wearing guy in Parliament, you know, being able to say what he likes. And although the press say they reported on it, well, I don't remember that. At the moment Winston says something the same, it's all a huge bonfire.
Oh, I know.
I guess you've got to expect that.
Well, they've got an agenda, and it's not the agenda of actually reporting the news. It's the agenda of trying to get Winston Peters because he doesn't like the media, and so therefore he's public enemy number one, and away they go.
Well, we all understand that. But I'm totally for what he said. It's true.
It is true.
And, you know, what I like about Winston is look at the work that he's done since he's been there. First of all, he goes overseas and represents us, and he looks good. That's a good start compared with the last person who went over dressed in a sack with a face painted and did nothing at all, in my opinion. And she's crooked too, with the deals that her husband got. She did absolutely nothing in the 6 years that she was there that I can recall. Winston's done more in the 6 weeks that he's been running, or whatever time it is.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly right. I think Winston's been on a couple of trips since taking over. I'm not sure Nanaia Mahuta did anything more than one trip.
Well, he's been around the islands. He's been to Australia several times. He's been to India, probably been to other places that I don't know about. But he's been working the whole time.
And all the media do is attack him over something that he said that was 100% true.
Yeah, what can you say? I'm sorry to be boring, but what can you say about it?
Well, what you can say is that the media are bent and they need to be gassed.
Yeah, but they won't be.
Oh, they will. They're doing it themselves.
So we just have to live with it.
Till they all tip over.
Well, they won't. I can't understand it. It's just, the mind boggles.
It does indeed. All right, Jack, thank you for your call today, and we'll talk next week.
Sorry it was sweet and short, but that's all I have to offer.
Oh, well, that's all we need from you, Jack. Thanks very much for calling in.
See you, Cam. Bye.
See you, bye. Welcome to Cam's Buddies, Jimmy. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Cameron. Fired up, mate. Fired up seeing what's happening in our democracy. Now, what do you got for me this week?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about that. Winston Peters had a State of the Nation address in Palmerston North, though why he did it in Palmerston North, I have no idea, but he still filled the halls, standing room only for the old battler, and promptly got Chris Hipkins to react to it. So he got to give Hipkins a slap down, and then the media wailing started. So I'm interested to know what you think about the speech and what the media reaction means and what's it all about.
I take this is when Winston compared the Labour Party co-governance to Nazis.
Yeah, well, he didn't actually, but...
Yeah. Well, look, to be honest, the use of Nazi in our talk about our democracy is insane. And, you know, what the Nazis did was just so appalling. It's not really even comparable, but the left started calling everyone Nazis and fascists. I mean, the Green Party used fascists all the time. So for Winston to come back at them and then the media to melt down just shows how pathetic the whole media situation is, and that's why they're going broke, man.
Well, what Winston was saying...
clickbait central.
Yeah, clickbait, exactly. But what Winston was saying isn't wrong, is it? He was saying that if you have policies and media and government all deciding that we're going to prefer someone or a group of people on the basis of race or their DNA, that ends in disaster, and that he's opposed to that, and he's opposed to it vociferously, and now we've got all these howls of outrage. You kind of have to believe that the media are all okay with, superior DNA and all of that sort of stuff. It's kind of strange.
Well, it is, and I completely agree with Winston's sentiment. But is it DEI or diversity,
all of that
and
nonsense.
inclusion?
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, that is literally looking at that, and we've got greater problems here, where the woke left are forcing stuff on our democracy. Equity means equal outcomes, whereas we want to be looking for equality, which means equal opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think the West is in great trouble in that respect, actually. Look at Boeing's planes.
Well, Winston called them woke cultural Marxists. Is he wrong?
They are. He's dead right. It's literally cultural Marxism. It's affected us so badly. And all the people in the media believe in it. And fortunately, the voters in New Zealand don't and have rejected it. But they just the media can't accept it.
It's really puerile and nonsensical. I mean, TV1 was running a headline on Tuesday night saying, what Winston is claiming he meant, has he been told off by the PM? It's so juvenile. It's the media who misrepresented all of this, and now they're trying to get Winston so he gets told off by Luxon. But I could just imagine Luxon trying to tell him off. Instead of just bark at him and tell him to sit down.
Yeah, but I think Luxon probably, cause I did see that, but Luxon's probably trying to shut the media up because he's sick to death of them going on. What's Winston saying got to do with Luxon?
Well, the media are going to Luxon saying, well, what do you think about Winston's thing? And, Luxon came out and stupidly said it was unhelpful. which is one of the most ridiculous things you can say in politics, that something's unhelpful. But, who is it helpful to?
Well, it's just not an answer, eh? You either should say, I don't support it, or I do support it, not give a sort of unequivocal, meaningless answer. And this is part of Luxon's problem, right? He doesn't really take a stand on anything, because we know where Winston stands and David Seymour stands.
In order to stand, you need a backbone.
And Luxon's sort of trying to impress everyone and impressing no one. He's got to pick who he's going to support here.
Christopher Luxon said Winston Peters' Nazi comparison is not helpful. Well, I can't think of a more ridiculous word in politics than helpful. Because I tell you what, Winston's statement was incredibly helpful for Winston. It may not be for Luxon, but it was helpful for Winston.
I mean, I completely agree with Winston, don't get me wrong, but just the comparisons to Nazis, it is pretty strong language, and it set the media off on this tone. Instead of talking about Winston's content, they're just talking about that, and we just keep doing that. Well, I guess the media need to do that for clickbait, though. We can't actually have a debate in this country without hyperbole now,
I know.
Basing policy on race is nuts. It's absolutely insane, and it's going to lead to horrendous outcomes.
Oh, it's going to be totally horrendous.
And also, I don't understand the long-term strategy of it. I mean, and let's say 100 years, when a lot of, 80% of New Zealand has got some sort of Maori ancestry. I mean, huge amount of people got already, their policy collides with what is already normal, where you just treat everyone, it's going to run out of space. Who's going to be Maori enough, So it's really just a power grab by the socialists, this stuff, to try and enforce socialism into our democracy without doing it through the ballot box.
Did you see Stuff went and rung up, managed to find some band member from Chumbawamba to get them to have a whine about it? But the funniest thing of all, this is what Winston Peters said in a press release. This story has been initiated by a lefty shill reporter who proactively sought to call a member of a former band which disbanded 12 years ago, give their biased appraisal of what was said in my speech, and concocted a ham-fisted attempt at a story that does nothing but show how my comments about these sorts of media organisations are correct.
I can't believe they did that. But anyway, that's what they did. That's what he
ends it with, if the reporter had any clue of the law and not just some opinionated fake news headline, they wouldn't have bothered publishing this nonsense.
Well, the other thing that happened that impressed me this week was Winston slapping Chris Hipkins down, and then telling him to get drunk on a wine biscuit, then taking a packet of wine biscuits into the
Winston has dominated the news cycle now for 5 days on a speech that normally would never be reported. I mean, him and his media advisors must be sitting there sniggering into their whiskies as they're smoking cigars for a job well done.
Well, Winston's defining his age. I mean, he's outshone Mahuta as a foreign minister in 5 months. I mean, I guess Mahuta she had COVID, but closed borders. But still, he's been to India and he's been to Australia,
around the Pacific, Fiji, Australia,
and he's off to China. He's had the Chinese foreign minister here recently. I mean, this is his work ethic, and he's slaying all the other parliamentarians on the other side. So really is. Either it shows that Winston's either got a great work ethic, or the other side is just were incredibly lazy.
I'm so glad I voted for him. You were an ACT voter, but you'll probably start lying about that shortly and saying, yeah, I voted for Winston.
Well, to be honest, I was having this conversation just recently with someone. I said, if I'd given my vote to Winston, I'd also be very happy. But he's impressing a lot of people. The problem Winston has is he has let us down before, and a lot of people really love what he's doing, but they still were a bit cagey about giving him their vote. I guess that's how I'd see it.
Yeah, well, given what he's doing at the moment, I'm starting to wonder a couple of things, whether or not he slipped a couple of quid to Chumbawamba so that they could have a moan in the media so he could keep the story going, and B, whether or not he knows that there's some polls out coming out soon, and so he's getting into the media to get a bump in the polls.
Well, he's done a beautiful job. He's sucking all the headlines away. And I mean, National's had a bit with its kicking out the useless tenants and, you know, a bit of media, but it hasn't generated anywhere near the clicks that Winston's stuff has. Although I honestly wish the media would focus on the content of Winston's speech and the meaning, like what he's actually talking about, not just the buzzwords and you know, that's just the way it is. I don't know how we get that across to the masses. I just don't know. If anyone knew what Winston was talking about, it'd be really hard for most people to disagree with it. You know,
no, the thing is, the thing with Winston though, now he's got the X thing sorted. He's got the Facebook thing sorted. And that's all that matters. He's bypassing the media. He's issuing press releases, chucking them out on X. He's getting, you know, thousands of views on his stuff. All the while, the other media are gassing themselves with this stuff.
And if anyone's listening, you need to get an X account and follow a lot of this on X because you see just a completely different perspective compared with what you see on our mainstream media. It's not even close to the same.
I know, it's hilarious.
And I suspect that across the whole planet, actually.
Oh, we're seeing that all the time. Trump's just suffered the same thing. He made a speech about...
Yeah, I just was going to say the same thing, the bloodbath comments.
Yeah, he made a speech in saying that, you know, that the auto industry is going to suffer a bloodbath if he's not re-elected and can reinvigorate American, industry. And then all the media run headlines. Trump says if he's not re-elected, there'll be a bloodbath. I mean... How dishonest can you get?
And what was scary to me is all the media ran exactly the same headline, like robots.
Just like they've done now. Just exactly like they've done now with Winston. Like robots, all the same headlines.
Yeah, honestly, thank God for XA.
Thank God for Elon Musk for freeing it.
It cost him $44 billion, but it's the best money he's ever spent, mate.
Oh, I think so.
But... I hope they look after him. Yeah, so Winston's, I don't know, where's he found this power, Cameron?
I don't know.
How old is Winston? Is he 80?
No, he's not. He's in his 70s, but he can, you know, foot it with the best of them for hours and hours on end. I've never seen anything like it. But,
I think he's really smart, eh?
Well, I was talking to him in March last year, so a year ago, and I said to him, are you fit for the election campaign? He says, I can't wait. Can't wait to get into it. And this is what I love. This is what I'm good at. And he had a real fire in his belly. And since the election, we've seen that fire and we're seeing it on a daily basis. And it's also infecting the rest of the New Zealand First Party because you're seeing that with Shane Jones. You're seeing that with Tanya Unkovich and other people in the New Zealand First team. They really are firing and they're, being sensible and saying and doing the right things. And I think people are starting to realise, hang on a second, when there's something here.
Well, I think, you're right. Winston just feeds it off the energy of this, this success and speeches and packed out halls and good polls. It just energises them big time, eh?
Yeah,
I guess
totally.
Success always energises people. But the problem we've got is the mainstream media gatekeepers, for our sides.
Totally.
It's such a hard thing to get through when you do a good popular speech and pack out a hall, and then you get all these crappy headlines.
But he's dominating the media cycle for a good long time, so he'll be pleased. He'll be pleased by this. I mean, we just had him on. We just had him on earlier, and he's very pleased. So, it shows. Anyway, Jimmy, I better cut a track and better wind the show up.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Cam.
Okay, mate. See you.
Mate. Cheers.
Yet again, there's no holding back from my buddies. Plenty of truth bombs dropped. If only the other media would listen to what the ordinary person says in the street. Maybe we should change the name for Cam's Buddies to Cam's Common Sense Buddies. Tell us your thoughts on Cam's Buddies by emailing inbox@realitycheck.radio or text to 2057.
You're listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
Now it's time for the mailbag. Got an anonymous comment about my monologue from last week. Yes, Cam, good points, sock it to them. And now about my interview with Tanya Ankovich. I really enjoyed listening to your chat with Tanya before she made it into Parliament, and today's discussion with her did not disappoint either. What a great addition to the New Zealand First lineup. Good job. And that was from Beth. I've got one here that says, listening to Cam and Tanya Ankovich, amazing, gives me confidence. And Ruth sends a lengthy message saying, I really appreciated your interview with Tanya. She seems to be a lovely person and a breath of fresh air. I'm glad we have a person like her in Parliament. It restores a modicum of faith in the system, a smidgen. You talked about all the reading she has to do, and it got me thinking that perhaps Labour losers didn't actually do their job properly and invest the time in doing the reading to be informed on what the regulations are and what the public wanted. If my experience of submissions is anything to go by, those lefty politicians were looking at their phones and not concentrating and seemed only interested in hearing what they agreed with. And look what happened to them as a party in the last election. Her faith will guide her and give her strength, which is my experience in life as well as another person of faith. Also, I agree with you too, Cam, about Julian Assange from the political agenda last Friday. A lot of people in the freedom community seem to hold him up as some sort of truth martyr. Really? I'm not impressed. Keep up the good work in all your forums. Thank you. And Danny emailed in about my interview with Graham Davis. I listened to the second half of your crunch on Thursday. I had the privilege of cruising our yacht in Fiji in the winters following Bainimarama's takeover. I found it fascinating to compare what Fijians, including those closely aligned with the Great Council of Chiefs, told me, and what the Australian and NZ news media were peddling. I also talked to the Indian community, and that was very interesting. Cam, from what you said on the crunch, it sadly seems that the dark past is returning to Fiji and taking over. That makes me sad. I love the place and the people. And a couple of comments, or just one comment actually, on Cam's buddies. Cam, regarding the ballet subsidies, it's a European art form. I recently went and took 2 ballet novices, and they loved it. I've only seen 3 live ballet performances in my life, so I'm not an elite snob. Would love to have seen more, but I'm relatively poor. With all the funds poured into Maori and other cultural art forms, I do not begrudge subsidising the ballet or the classical arts. Interesting to notice the demographics of the audience and the nature of the dances performed. Quite white and heterosexual themes going on. I do, though, agree about the cricket. And that's the mailbag from this week.
Did you see the people's terms for the New Zealand COVID inquiry campaign, which has just launched at www.covidinquiry.co.nz? The scope of the current COVID-19 inquiry is narrow and restrictive, seeking to learn lessons and not find fault. The people's terms is an independent, comprehensive and targeted set of terms that fundamentally redefines how the inquiry should operate and what will be reviewed, including the removal and replacement of Commissioners Blakely and Whitehead. If left to their own devices, official bureaucrats will cherry-pick and omit whatever they want to find a result that favours them. Our terms close the loopholes to leave no stone unturned, ensuring such an abuse of power never happens again. Secondly, public pressure works to achieve results. Politics is a numbers game. Your participation in this campaign provides the political pressure required to drive accountability for decisions made during the COVID years. It takes less than 30 seconds to add your name to the people's terms and safeguard against future government abuse of fundamental human rights. Go to www.covidinquiry.co.nz. That's covidinquiry.co.nz and sign your name today.
That's it for the crunch this week, and what fun discussions we had too. Winston Peters certainly looks to be on song, and the media are making it easy for him. More free hits than a game of rounders at the Special Olympics. The lying legacy media really do themselves no favours at all. But this is, of course, a major concern, especially when they all lie in unison. When the media lie, then truth and democracy dies. They seem to have no self-awareness and are starting to look like the real opposition party, the media party, except none of them have the guts to actually stand for office. The more they whine, the more they deserve to be gassed. You can keep up with all my shows, and indeed all of our shows, by using the RCR app. You can even use the app to stream live in the car. And a big thanks to the team that helped put all this together to make it the best show in New Zealand radio on politics. It's been a real pleasure having you all back this week. I'm loving all your feedback and really enjoy talking to so many people sharing their thoughts on politics, life, and everything in between. So a big shout out to all of you. Thanks for listening and having faith in me as we continue to explore this beautiful game of politics. Don't forget to email suggestions to inbox@realitycheck.radio for people for me to interview, and let's make this show the best political show in New Zealand. Stay tuned for a repeat of Rodney Hyde's Real Talk coming up next, followed by a replay of Truth Speaker with Tobias Tahi. Looking forward to having you join me again next week for The Crunch with Cam Slater.
You've been listening to The Crunch with Cam Slater. Remember, you can check out the replays for today's show on our website at www.realitycheck.radio/replays. Tune in every Thursday at 4 p.m. for more with Cam Slater, right here on RCR, Reality Check Radio.